I call to order this meeting of the Santa Barbara Unified School District's Board of Education for Tuesday, August 28th, 2018. And we will begin by rising to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Matsuoka.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Buenas tardes. Si algún miembro del público desea escuchar la interpretación en español, tenemos los aparatos disponibles por estas puertas dobles. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. And we also have headsets for the hearing impaired. They're available, so please indicate if you need a headset. All right. So I'm moving on to announcement of closed session action. So we only made a motion and vote on item number B2, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, Government Code, paragraph 1 of subdivision D of section 54956.9, Student V, Santa Barbara Unified School District, Special Education Due Process, OAH, case number 201-8050102, approval/ratification of August 9th, 2018 financial settlement agreement and general release. A motion was made by Ms. Parker to approve and to go ahead and pay $117,950 for the final settlement agreement. It was seconded by Mr. Paredes Ulloa, and it was voted unanimously 5-0. Moving forward to Superintendent's report, Mr. Matsuoka.
I have two items to share, and we'll begin with an introduction of Stephanie Henderson. And the board voted on her interim assistant principal position last board meeting. She's been hard at work for, 3 weeks? However long we've been, well, it was before we opened school. And the board's seen her resume, so it'll be a chance for you to just see Stephanie, hear from her. She's been a teacher at DP for a while, English teacher, but involved in other supporting systems. She's coached athletics, and she's been an eager learner under Mr. Woodard. So welcome, Stephanie, and invite you to come share some comments with the school board.
Thank you, Superintendent Matsuoka, and members of the Board of Trustees, as well as Assistant Superintendent Sean Carey and DP Principal Bill Woodard, for this wonderful opportunity to serve DP as an assistant principal. Over my time as a teacher at DP, I've worked hard to develop my leadership capacity by not only being a teacher of various levels of English and other subjects such as AVID, but also by serving as a club advisor, an athletic coach, a PLC lead, and the Allies for Equity Committee co-chair. I see this next opportunity as a way to contribute, to continue to grow as a leader and contribute to a school whose students I truly care about. Some goals I have during this interim position are to strengthen the relationships that I have with staff, students and parents that I already know, and to form new connections with those I am just meeting and have yet to work with. In my first 2 weeks and 2 days, I have learned a great deal, and I am eager to learn more throughout the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I have a second comment about an employee, and this will be Rafael Santana's last board meeting where he provides translation services. Where'd he go?
It's providing translation.
Okay, well, we'll need to get Rafael back in the room. And so I remember my first, couple months on the job, and I got to know Rafael. And they came from San Jose area. So we shared some stories about, common work experiences. So he's been in the Spanish interpretation and translation work since 2012. There he is. Welcome. And I think during his time, I think he's watched and we've watched this whole translation unit grow and grow and get better and better. He's really one of our veterans. I like how he ad-libs a little bit during the translation. He just has a great heart and a great spirit. And his service and dedication to our community has just been unwavering now for 6 years. So, Rafael, we really appreciate your contributions to the community, to your presence at school board meetings. You've translated, interpreted at many school events. I've seen you, literally everywhere. Yes. And he always has a smile. He just does it with a great heart. And they're retiring. So both he and Alicia, who served our district for a long time, I believe you're retiring to Paso Robles, or somewhere nearby.
I'm not retiring. Alicia has, but I'm not.
Well, you're going to keep working. So, but you will be leaving us, and we just wanted to take this moment to recognize and appreciate you. So, everybody, applause. And I would like to invite the members of the DLAC committee to join me up on the steps here, because we're going to take a picture and give Rafael a certificate. So, come on up.
It's also been an honor to work for the district. You have the greatest team of interpreters, and I thoroughly enjoy every minute of it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. So thank you to the district, thank you to the community for giving me this opportunity.
All right, scoot on close over there. Ready? 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to add, interpretation is so valuable, and the work that you do or did is such a needed process. And I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge interpreters and the work that they do. It's difficult work, but it's so meaningful, and I would be at a loss if I didn't have your work and the work of fellow interpreters. So thank you for the work and dedication to that for us. So moving on to board comments and correspondence. Do I have any? Ms. Capps?
Thank you. So, I have a dream that our district will become a model of sustainability in the country. The environmental movement was founded here in Santa Barbara, and we live in a time, and my belief, that we're in a real crisis. And so I got a really thoughtful note from a parent several weeks ago who was concerned about waste in our district and just asking questions in a really thoughtful way. And she'd done a ton of research about waste reduction efforts around the state, and had even tried to get legislation and that kind of thing. And so we met with Nancy Weiss this week, and Nancy, being the kind of person she is, who wants to say yes and not say no, we're looking at ways in which we can improve an already pretty good system, in that we compost almost in every school in terms of our flatware and service and the food system. And also that in light of Santa Barbara City just passing a ban on straws, which takes an effect in January, I was pleased to learn that we are straw-free here in this district. So I think those are important things. But I'm hearing now from more parents about sort of ways in which we can reduce waste in their schools. And so I just wanted to report that back, because it was a nice correspondence to receive from a parent, and to have a staff member and a director here at the district who's very willing to, who's already doing great work, but always also willing to make even more improvements. So thanks.
Thank you. It's always nice to get positive mail. Ms. Parker, did you have something to say? No? Anyone else? All right, I will just speak to having attended back-to-school night at Monroe, and I was really pleased to see the large group of parents that attended, and I also was excited to find out I found my third participant in Coffee with the Board. I also see Valerie there, Ms. Veronica, I know it was a V, principal at Harding, who also volunteered for our first Coffee with the Board, so I'm very, very excited about that. And so our third one will be November 16th at Monroe, and it will be most likely around 8:30 or 8:45. I think your idea of the starting time waiting for a student drop-off is a great idea. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we're really excited to begin this new series, and we're hoping that it might be something. Of course, it'll be up to the next board president and the board to see if this is something that we want to continue. But we're hoping that we get a lot of participants, because the whole point is that we want to provide transparency and opportunities to engage with us, not necessarily because of a particular issue, though there might be an issue that you would like to talk about, but also just to get to know you, just to build relationships and connections with the people in our community and in our schools. So with that said, we have any public comments on non-agenda matters within the jurisdiction of the Board of Education?
We do not.
All
Can I
right.
just ask for a point of order
Yes.
on that? I want to be sure that there are no requests to ask, to speak on any of the consent agenda items, anything that starts with a D?
No, they're all for the,
Okay,
they're all for F.
thanks.
But speaking of consent agenda items, are there any items that fellow board members would like to pull? Ms. Parker?
I'd like to pull D1.
Okay.
I'd like to pull D4.
D4. Anyone else? So typically we wait till the end of the meeting, but we do ask if there are brief comments that we can discuss them now. Do you think these are brief comments? No. All right. So we will pull items 1 and 4. And do I have a motion to approve the remaining consent agenda?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So we will go to at the end of the meeting, we will discuss items D1 and item D4. Moving on to action agenda items, we will begin. Here we go. E1, Board Action on Interdistrict Transfer Appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, Case number 201819-T04.
In the case of 201819-T04, move approval to deny petition for interdistrict transfer appeal.
And can I just clarify that you've moved to deny the transfer appeal?
Yes.
Okay, and then I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Moving on to E2, Board Action on Interdistrict Transfer Appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, Case number 201819-T05.
In the case of 201819-T05, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer appeal to a school with available space.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Moving on. Number 3, Board Action on Interdistrict Transfer Appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, Case number 201819-T06.
In the case of 201819-T06, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer for appeal. Yeah, petition of interdistrict transfer appeal.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to number 4, Board Action on Interdistrict Transfer Appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, Case number 201819-T07.
In the case of 201819-T07, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer appeal.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Number 5, board action on interdistrict transfer appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, case number 201819-08.
In the case of 2018-1908, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer to a school with available space.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Item number 6, board action on interdistrict transfer appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, case number 201819-T09.
In the case of 201819-T10, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer appeal to a school with available space.
Can
So
I
that
just
was-
clarify the number on that one? Was that T09?
T09,
T09.
T09?
yeah. Number 6.
Okay. In the case of 201819-T09, move to approve petition to a school with available space.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Moving on to item number 7, board action on interdistrict transfer appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, case number 201819-T10.
In the case of 201819-T-10, move approval for petition of school, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer appeal to a school with available space.
Second.
All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Moving to item number 8, board action on interdistrict transfer appeal, Education Code 46600-46611, case number 201819-T11.
In the case of 201819-T11, move to approve petition of interdistrict transfer appeal to a school with available space.
Second.
All those in favor? Passes unanimously.
And I gladly move that over.
Yes, we'll now move on to item number 9, new section. Board action on petition for readmission of an expelled student, Education Code 48918, case number 201617-05.
In the case of 201617-05, move approval for readmission from expulsion for full expulsion for one school year ended June 2017, completed in 2018.
Motion? Okay. I'm sorry, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And can I ask for a pause for a moment? So maybe Dr. Wageneck might want to step out at this point if there are any interdistrict transfer appeal families here to answer their questions since they don't know their case numbers.
Thank you.
I'll be back for number 2. Okay.
Okay, so we're on number 10. Here we go. Board action on petition for readmission of an expelled student, Education Code 48918, case number 201617-38.
In the case of 201617-38, move approval for petition for reentry from expulsion for one school year ended January 2018.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Moving to item number 11, board action on petition for readmission of an expelled student, Education Code 48918, case number 201718-03.
03 or 29?
And number 11.
Number 11, okay. In the case of 201718-03, move approval for petition for reentry from expulsion, full expulsion for one school year ended June 2018.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Moving to item number 12, board action on petition for readmission of an expelled student, Education Code 48918, case number 201718-29.
In the case of 201718-29, move approval for petition for reentry from expulsion, suspended expulsion for one semester ended June 2018.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so now we are moving to item 13. It is the approval of agreement between Santa Barbara Unified School District and Child Abuse Listening Mediation for 2018-19 Elementary School Mental Health Services. Dr. Wagonet is
So,
outside.
Dr. Reed, may we just skip to 14 and 15 and come back to 13?
Moving on to number 14, approval of provisional internship permits. Dr. Becchio.
Good evening, members of the board. I come before you tonight with this item for your consideration. We have two teachers currently serving in special education, one at Monroe, one at Santa Barbara Community Academy. We are seeking approval so we can apply to the CTC for their provisional internship permit. And that does require that the board take action before we can seek approval from the CTC.
I move approval of the provisional internship permits.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Passes unanimously. We'll move now to item number 15, approval of 2018-19 Statement of Work for Innovate Ed. Ms. Carey and Dr. Ramirez.
Yes, good evening, President Dr. Reed and other board members, fellow board members. We're here, Dr. Ramirez and myself, to ask for your approval of our contract with Innovate Ed. As you know, that Innovate Ed is a consulting firm that has been partnering with us for a couple of years now, and we have determined that we are making great strides in terms of our systems leadership. And improving systemic thinking around increases in student outcomes, improvements in student outcomes. We are also recognizing the need to continue building our own capacity to lead and support this work from a district instructional team layer to the level of the school leadership teams and even through our teacher teams and PLCs. So at the outset of this school year, 2018-2019, we have an express purpose of transitioning away from the consulting work with Innovate Ed through the building of our own capacity. I think I would commend to you the second attachment, which the first one is displaying on the screen right now, but the second attachment is not the most visually accessible, but it does let you see in a view with respective columns. It gives you a better sense, I think, of the nature of the activities that are that we engage in partnership with with Innovate Ed. So if you'll scroll down there, Mr. Rouse, you'll see that unique to this year, we do have time set aside for our newly reorganized Ed Services team, including new capacity with directors at the secondary and elementary level, and other shifts that we made. And so we as a team are building a lot of capacity this year in our own right and in consultation with Innovate Ed. We continue to have the principals meeting as cohorts. Of course, we feel like the SLT is the most foundational unit in moving a school forward. So it's this concept of leading from the middle and the group leading the group. But we will be doing some work with teacher teams and diving down into an area that's a little more granular than what we've been doing. Again, with the hope of kind of building infrastructure, building some habits and tools that will persist beyond this next school year. Our DLT is a district, it's an acronym that stands for our District Leadership Team. We meet regularly. It's a cross-section of cabinet members, Ed Services team members, and site leaders, as well as some teachers on special assignment. And this year, our DLT meetings include 2 out-of-area trips to participate in a conference. We're calling it the Fullen Conference, but it's networked improvement, as inspired largely by the research and work of Michael Fullen. So I like this view better because it gives you a sense of just at how many levels this robust partnership functions. And at this time, Dr. Ramirez and I can answer any questions you might have.
I just have a question. When did you begin to work with Innovate Ed? How long have you been working with them?
We began working, a small group of us, in the 15-16 school year, but that was something that was initiated statewide. where representatives from different districts throughout the state were able to come to learn about systems leadership and systems change. So it started very, very small, and eventually it built out into something where we wanted a more robust partnership.
Thank you. I think it's exciting that you're transitioning after this year. I think that's a good move on the district's part to be able to take that on. And probably Mr. Matsuoka, Mr. Systems Man, was probably very helpful with that. So do we have a motion?
I will move approval of the 2018-2019 Statement of Work for Innovate Ed.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. And we move back to item number 13, Dr. Wagener, now that you are back with us. So approval of agreement between Santa Barbara Unified School District and Child Abuse Listening Mediation for 2018-19 Elementary School Mental Health Services.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. School Board, I bring to you the proposed MOU for mental health services between Santa Barbara Unified School District and Child Abuse Listening Mediation, most often known as CALM. So this is the culmination of the work that started in May to co-construct a model of school-based mental health services for our students in preschool through grade 6. And at this point, I will open it up for any questions you might have.
Ms. Parker?
I would just say this is, I mean, obviously you've been working hard on this, and so this is an exciting next step. And I'm very hopeful.
Thank you.
Mr. Paredes Ulloa?
I'll just second that, and just really thankful for the work that the district has been doing with CALM to try to backfill the funding necessary to make this into a full program as opposed to the semi-program that we saw at the end of the last school year. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't be prouder of this work and what you've done with this, Dr. Wagener, and I look forward to seeing this continue and really flourish with our district. So thank you.
Thank you. I will take the opportunity in response to that to say that I've been, I'll get emotional and say it's been heartwarming to meet with funders around our community and just realize how committed to our children that they actually are, and that they do want to be a part of something that's done well. And I believe this is done well. So.
All right, thank you for all your hard work. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, that's important, right?
I will move the approval of the agreement between the Santa Barbara, between the Santa Barbara Unified School District and Child Abuse Listening Mediation for 2018-19 Elementary School Mental Health Services.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
So typically at this time, we break for 5 minutes before we start our report discussion agenda. Are we in agreement to do that?
Sure.
All right, so we will take a 5-minute break. We will now move forward to our report and discussion agenda items. We'll do F1, Annual Academic Performance Report, CAASPP, CASP, Results for English Language Arts, Literacy, and Mathematics, 2015 through 2018. Ms. Carey, Dr. Ramirez.
Good evening again, Board. This title slide is intriguing in and of itself because it does highlight for us that we do finally have 4 years worth of CASP data. So we are well beyond the time, and we are just able to say this is just baseline information, or it's too early to detect any kind of trends. And we are, solidly in an era when we can begin to look at this information as being indicative of trends. And we see some modest growth here, and also some areas for that really are for improvement, no doubt. There are I want to commend to you and really to the public the two attachments. If anybody is able to view them and interested to do so, the narrative is a very good high-level summary of the student achievement outcomes as measured by CASP, which can be dense to sift through, so that narrative can be really helpful. And as with any presentations around data, this view of our student data presents as, on the one hand, it presents and communicates information, but at the same time, like all sets of data, it engenders a lot of questions. So any teacher in this position would find themselves asking, what do you notice and what do you wonder about this data as we go through it? We wanted to highlight this for you because there's been a lot of conversation in recent days and weeks about our district's mission, also our core values. But we do have an instructional vision that is iterating and evolving. It is one that we feel very confident of providing to all of our practitioners, TK-12, an entry point, and that is to ensure that students' capacity to read, reason, and communicate prepares them for college and career readiness. So much like what we talked about earlier in the earlier agenda item in terms of what we've been doing on a systems front to lead the work toward improved student outcomes, this vision also gives shape to our mission, our core activities. So what we'll see here, and there's several sections to this report. First is some district-wide views of student data, then we'll look at a view by subgroup, and then we'll look at a view by school. So there's different ways to sort and view this data. In the district-wide view, and this is a view of ELA, you'll see here over the 4 years, as I said, some modest growth. This is probably, but still overall that 55% of our students are in the standard met or exceeded performance bands. So just to remind, I'll offer several reminders as we go through this for everyone's benefit, that students land in performance bands of standard exceeded, standard met, standard nearly met, and standard not met. But in addition to that bucket or band in which they land, they also get a scaled score, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in a couple of slides. An important high-level takeaway, though, is that the state's new accountability system, not so new anymore, the state's current accountability system actually expects and rewards growth. So do keep in mind that if students were just performing at their same level every year, we would, when we see growth like this, we're seeing a student not only in the aggregate, we're not only seeing students improve, but we're seeing them improved against a more rigorous standard with every year that they matriculate through the public school system. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. But it helps to kind of understand that growth here, while incremental, does also represent growth against an increasingly rigorous standard. And then you'll see that even though there's this kind of modest arc of improvement over time, that the results by grade level are varied. So we saw the greatest gains. Again, I'm in kind of the high-level takeaways mode. We saw the greatest gains. We saw greater gains in elementary grade spans than in the secondary grade spans, but we also see higher performance levels in secondary grade spans than we do in elementary. So those are, again, still just some high-level takeaways. This is a good slide for me just to remind everyone that this is about capturing third grader, the performance of third graders, the performance of fourth graders. You have to keep in mind that they're not the same, that there's a cohort effect here, a cohort effect that is very difficult to explore in any kind of depth with this high level of view of student data. But when we look at 4 years worth of data, we're talking about, 2015-16 third graders become 2016-17 fourth graders. And so that's just a reminder for everyone viewing this data. In this slide, this really is where the mention of scaled score becomes pertinent again. So we sometimes use this phrase distance from level 3, and level 3 again is standard met. So of the 4 performance bands, standard not met, standard nearly met, standard met, and standard exceeded. When we say distance from 3 is, and each one of those performance bands has a window of scaled score. It's a 4-digit number, and we're interested in, what does it take to cross that threshold into the standard met territory? So when we say level 3 or a student has achieved level 3, they've crossed over that bottom threshold, that floor of the bandwidth for level 3. So for a third grader, if they have a score of 2450, they're solidly in the standard MET range. Now, if they kept that score of 2450 next year, once they're a fourth grader, that would actually land them in level 2, standard nearly met. So again, they have to keep improving against a more rigorous standard in order to be demonstrating growth. So what we see here is on the y-axis, when you see that 0, that is equivalent to that level 3, the bottom of the range for level 3. So if you need a 2430 as a third grader to be considered standard MET, then how many points above that or below that with your scaled score are you? And what we see here is that over time, we see growth in that for grades 3 through 8. And this is a large grab of students. So this is all of our 3rd through 8th graders and the average of their scaled score. It's a little simpler sometimes to think about as just 11th graders. So just one grade level, 1,500 kids, what their scores were on the ELA portion of CASP, how much against that standard 3, that standard MET threshold, did they improve or did they lose ground? I will note here that in general, we don't have the data yet as released by the state, so state level reports are not out. We have our own scores and our own system, and this presentation of data is based on that, but we don't yet have, for example, the state average for last year, so you'll see that that's missing in slides, that hyphenated line, because it's not released yet. That data is embargoed. And you'll also see that our analysis of data shows us that when it comes to grade 11, and this is not so true of grades 3 through 8, there's some data verification that is problematic, and we tend to rate ourselves and project lower scores than what ends up coming in for the state. So on these distance from 3 slides, I want to caution you about this dark blue bar and know that we actually anticipate that that's what we're projecting based on the data we have, but that's likely to come in higher based on our historical analysis of the last 3 years. So we've been looking at ELA. This is the district-wide view of math performance. It follows the same trend as the ELA performance with modest increments, but still fewer than half of our students are able to demonstrate that they can meet or exceed standards in mathematics. So while there's growth, there's even more room for improvement. Similar trends here with the 4-year breakdown by grade level. And the orange parenthetical notation shows the percentage of growth over time. Here's our distance from 3 view for mathematics. So a notable here is because, and you can see kind of how this all fits together, because fewer than half of our students are showing that they can meet level 3, that's why we don't see any bars above that 0 on the y-axis, because we still do not yet have the aggregate average of our students taking math crossing over into saying more than half of them have crossed over that level 3 threshold. And again, taking that final bar for grade 11 with a grain of salt. Oh, I will note on this slide, and I'll toggle back quickly, that this is our dashboard prediction, which is only based on grades 3 through 8. For the high school, the dashboard indicators become the college career readiness indicators, which a lot is embedded in that indicator. So for mathematics, we're predicting the 3 orange pie pieces there, and for ELA, we're predicting the 4, the green over in the inset there.
Good evening, Board. I'll be walking us through the performance and growth by subgroup, by demographic subgroup. Just to, as a point of reference, this is a little different than the information and the data that you just saw. This is actually aggregated 3 through 8 and 11. So you won't see it called out by grade level, but rather by demographic group. and you have here side by side both CASP ELA and CASP Math. Here again, we see some incremental growth, particularly over the trajectory in time that we've had CASP scores available. Admittedly, these are different cohorts each year. Kids would conceivably move in and out of these cohorts depending on their grade level. Where we have seen some rather remarkable growth would be in both ELA and Math relative to our African American students. That's where we do see some very promising gains. But in most instances, again, the growth is very incremental, which again is a trajectory that we've seen in the aggregate. Here we have a breakdown by language, and what we have is specifically our ELs in both Math and in ELA. One of the things that I would like to represent with this is as students reclassify, they come into this group identified as reclassified, and although that is viewed here as one group, again, it is a very a wide array of learners, and again in different grade levels as they come in and out of even testing grades. So, for example, in 2015-16, we may have picked up students that were in 8th grade. The following year, they're now in 9th grade. They're not assessing, nor are they part of the cohort. So it is not a consistent cohort, to just interject that thought. And this is the piece that we want to, among others, really focus and pay attention to, is how are our students being supported throughout their entire trajectory as they come across different continua of language development, from students that have not reclassified perhaps yet and are still identified as English learners to post-reclassification. The state is asking us to maintain monitoring beyond reclassification. So that is something that we're looking to onboard and better support, precisely for this kind of phenomenon where students may stagnate. Certainly that is not the trend by and large. Reclassified students tend to do better as a cohort, but that's not true of every student, nor is it true of every cohort, even by grade level or by school. So the monitoring of students post-reclassification is going to be very important. Now, an important thing to just note, their performance does not mean that they then revert back to English learner status. Sometimes we get ourselves a little bit confused on that note, but it is worth mentioning that the monitoring component of this, for very obvious reasons, is something that we need to pay close attention to, because those language supports post-reclassification are important, although they may look different in the classroom. Here we have the status of our students based on socioeconomic background. And to the left, you'll see students that are considered socioeconomically disadvantaged. We also would include them in low income is another way in which we refer to our group of students here, and those that are not. Typically marked by, I guess the simplest way to maybe view it is those that may participate in or be eligible for free and reduced lunch, and those that do not. And here we have probably one of the most sizable gaps in achievement, particularly in the realm of math. Although our math achievement isn't where we would like it to be, you see a very significant gap in achievement. And again, the incremental growth that we view our entire that we view our aggregate scores through. Finally, we get to disability status, and to the left you see students with an identified disability. These would be students that have an individualized education plan, and have, in some instances, perhaps a customized and tailored educational experience in our schools. And that is something that we have identified. It's been identified for us through the California dashboard and through technical assistance with the county office of the Santa Barbara County Education Office, where we have been working with them to articulate our plan and how to support our students with disabilities, who, again, admittedly have some of the most, where we have the most disproportionality in achievement. And again, this is specifically by disability status. So if you refer back to the other slides, there may be students that are in each one of those, and just in different places. But this is just a way to represent different views around our student populations. So next, we're going to launch into performance and growth by school. I think sometimes this is perhaps a different way of representing some of the work that we're undertaking and where we are relative to that. So we'll start with the elementary schools. This is in the realm of ELA literacy. And the blue bar, the darkest blue shade, is one that's called out for this year. This is where we are showing some promise at many of our schools. And I think it's important to recognize that we are seeing pockets of success that we are aiming to replicate. I would call the board's attention specifically to the achievement at Franklin as one of those remarkable points of just acknowledgement for their efforts. I would also like to say that sometimes the challenge with data like this is that we in some ways experience a bit of an echo effect. And what I mean by that is that the cultural conditions, the work of coming together, making sense of everything from shifts in learning to ways of collaborating and engaging as a school community, far precede any viable results. And understandably so, the tending to culture, expectations, and just sense-making needs to come first. So I would like to represent that this is a journey where some schools are further ahead, but where we are actively learning from one another. The work at Adams over the last few years, in spite of a small decrease this year, has been also equally remarkable, particularly with our efforts around balanced literacy, around appropriate technology integration, and just a number of other matters that are very relevant and form the mosaic for the right culture to really elicit success. SBCA showed some sizable gains this year in the realm of literacy hardening. So we're very, very excited to see some of this promising growth. But from my vantage point, I also look to McKinley, Cleveland, Monroe as schools where we really are targeting a lot of good efforts, and you'll hear about some of those later on in this meeting with some agenda items that I think are pertinent to this discussion as well. But I just wanted to represent that there are some significant pockets of success that I think can really put our finger on some key initiatives and ways that can substantiate why these results are happening. And I can assure you that they're not by chance. They're very much by design and with a lot of intent behind them. I'm going to go ahead and flip to math, just to have a discussion around math in this space. And then I'll turn it over to Ms. Carey for a discussion around the secondary schools. But here, representing the elementary schools, again, you see growth in some key schools and some trends that, although not one for one, are rather closely aligned between ELA and math. And although math will always and forever be its own universe, what we also know is that the ability to be literate, and it's why we led with that instructional vision, is hugely important to the development of math practices and competencies, particularly as it relates to this assessment, which is in its own right much more robust and just a much bigger representation of what kids can do with the skills and learnings that they have. So we are certainly not satisfied with the achievement again at some of our schools, but we also recognize that there are some cultural pieces that we're focusing on that will inform our work now and moving forward.
So a global statement about student performance in the secondary space is that it has been largely flat over the 4 years. In some ways, for these slides, the orange numbers are a little bit misleading because they call out just the change from last year to this year, but I would invite you to look at the 4 years as a trend, sort of visually look at those 4 bars. When it comes to junior high ELA, again, I think you'll perceive that sort of general flatness I'm describing with one notable exception. And this is where I'll piggyback on Dr. Ramirez's comment about just being familiar because of the work with systems leadership and the visibility we get to the kinds of processes that different schools in their broader leadership context, but also specific teams within schools. I'm familiar with what's been happening in ELA at Goleta Valley, and it's not by accident. I would agree with Dr. Ramirez that in that case, it's very clear to me that those efforts have paid off. They've been very, very intentional efforts there, and that's where it's both, on the one hand, you immediately go to, well, then we should just everybody should just be doing what they're doing, and it's not, it's a little bit that simple, in that we should be definitely asking about what it is they're doing and learning about what it is they're doing, but then we also need to find in each school's context, how do we translate, the processes that they utilized, that team of teachers utilized to get the tractionable results. How do we apply that then to our own context, our own sets of students' needs, and our own setting? Same thing for the high schools. Again, I feel like that's a largely flat kind of pattern there for ELA. I mean, it is just north of flat. That's why we see in the aggregate the growth that we see. So we're not generally losing ground in the ELA space or in the math space, but it would be a stretch to call it something other than I would say unacceptably flat with those pockets of strength. I mean, sometimes too, I would add, I'm just thinking about this junior high slide, there are things that this view of data does obscure. For example, we know at the level of a school site that there are oftentimes great gains for a particular subgroup of students. And sometimes that might be in concert with a school's identified instructional focus area, but it gets masked a little bit by the overall student performance data. I'm thinking specifically of one of our junior highs where we had great increases for special education students and students who are EL, and yet because all student scores decreased, it's sort of, those victories are a little bit obscured in this view. So do remember that there's more going on in all the stories for each one of these schools than what you see here. For math in the junior high context, sorry, I'm bopping all around. With junior high, some upward trends here, not necessarily from last year to this year, a little less flat, but remember math is the place where we had also more room to show improvement, so a greater challenge in terms of the overall number of students not showing that they could meet standards. So we need to see aggressive and accelerated improvements in student outcomes in math TK-12 in both grade spans. And here's the view of the high school view of math performance. Slightly more flat than the junior high view. So what this data tells us overall is that we have tremendous work ahead, as we have known and sensed, and as we are sort of in the midst of daily, to continue ensuring that all students are able to be equipped to demonstrate that they can master standards for ELA, and particularly for math, where we have that more acute need. We do see examples of school sites in particular, of grade levels, and even some examples that maybe don't show up in this presentation of where there have been very successful efforts as relates to subgroups. But we have a long way to go before we can feel very proud of the gains that we're showing, so that we are continuing to ensure that all students perform at high levels. So maintaining that excellence for some while ensuring that all students have that same opportunity and ultimately that same learning outcome as measured by CASP. I think at this time we're ready to entertain any comments or questions that board members may have.
Thank you. Ms. Parker?
Thank you, and I do appreciate the direction that the district is going, although I would say that it's disheartening to see so much room for improvement. I find that a couple of things. One, it's worrisome in the elementary space to see that big gap between sets of our schools. And at the junior high level, you would say I would really need to see the demographic breakdown, because the demographics, for example, between La Colina and La Cumbre are so different that I would want to see the subgroup breakdown to really see how students are doing. But at the elementary level, there are the two outliers, but the rest are really not outliers. And so they're quite similar in some ways. And if I were a parent in this district, I would be looking at that going, okay, well, these are schools that I need to have my kid at to show that kind of growth. And I am really worried about that. I think it's very disheartening to see that kind of gap. So that's one thing I'll say, and then I'll let you address that in just a moment, Dr. Ramirez. And then the other piece is district-wide. We have been so focusing on language arts, and I think a lot has been about capacity. Like we need to keep in mind how much teachers can take on in terms of professional development, and there's this new program rolling out, and so the focus has been there. But it shows in the math scores. And I'm hoping to hear that there is a plan to pivot to introduce that level of professional development around math instruction, because you can say we're gonna get to that, but it doesn't matter for the individual student who's been going through and missing out on the best type of math instruction, or the math instruction that each particular student needs. And so I'm hoping that you can address those 2 points.
Well, absolutely. I think to your point about the disparity that exists from one school to another, what I would offer up is that it's just as concerning for me. To be quite frank, it has required a certain level of candor in discussing what are the present conditions and what is resulting in the achievement of these achievement levels for students. What I would also point out is that demographically, let's just talk about that for a moment. We do have schools that in large part do not resemble one another, that are outliers, one to the next. But my focus is largely on schools that don't, schools that have demographically very similar groups of students and whose profile of student is very closely aligned and mirrored. One could argue that many of the conditions have been relatively consistent, and why there would be a 30% gap in some instances is very multifaceted. It's not an easy question, but it's one that we've been facing very, very much head on. What I can also represent for you is that the teachers at those schools are well aware, the staff, the parents, this has been communicated to them, And how we've been working through that is to ensure that our practices are getting better, that we are seeking the consult and the expertise of those teachers and the practices that are yielding these results. To the point of what I just mentioned earlier about there being kind of an echo effect. If you look at where Franklin was maybe 3 to 4 years ago, they would readily admit now that they're not where they want to be. But that growth has happened as a result of their maintaining focus. And that is where some of the challenge lies, is that the very same pressure points to take on more, to take on different, are the very ones that may inadvertently lead us to a place where we wind up trying to serve too many masters in a sense. And that's always going to be a point of tension for us, particularly in the elementary space where there's one teacher teaching across content, and the ability to hold new learning, to be able to collaborate effectively around it, to assess in a way that provides the right level of data to lead to different changes. I'm afraid to say it does take a lot. There's no way around it. You noted the focus on literacy. It's been a years long, and Ms. Parker, you've been a part of it for the time that I've been here. But it is also showing results. And you see it in that these are not just nominal gains. In certain instances, they're really more than incremental. They're really significant changes. The pivot to math has begun. In 6th grade, we're looking to push that into 5th grade and come up from kinder. So it's just been a challenge to be able to get into that space as fully and as robustly as we need to. But we also recognize that there is but so much time, effort, and initiatives that any one person can reasonably hold. So that is constantly the point of tension, and I can represent this. Our teachers have been incredible in coming to opportunities in June, in July, in August, outside of their calendar, outside of their work obligations, and have made the commitment to be there because they want to show gains. So it's not for lack of effort, and certainly not for lack of trying, but we have admittedly had very candid conversations at all levels about achievement.
Dr. Reed, if I could just follow up quickly on that. I appreciate that, and I know that staff at each site, especially sites where they see this disparity, that they take it hard when they see these kinds of results, and so I want to be sensitive to that. But I also want us to be really transparent, both with the public, but really with parents at the school site, because I feel like they need to know. This is not something that should be masked in any way. You can get so focused on your individual student, and rightfully so, but they need to be talking about it as a parent community with the staff. And it should be a team conversation between parents and teachers. Look, my Johnny didn't make this level, and I didn't realize that all these other students didn't make this level, and they're making it other schools in our district. So what's going on here, and how can we be part of this? But I really feel like with our PTAs and ELACs that this needs to be addressed directly.
If I can just make one comment about that, absolutely, we're of like mind with that. We have not hid from the data. In fact, we need to really own it. It's what I've seen at every level, from the leadership principal level to the staff level. And to your point, no one's satisfied with that. To a person, they aren't. And these conversations are ones that we continue to continue to have, but looking for solutions and looking for commitments. The other thing that I will say in the parent space is that we've prepared reports, documents, and presentations similar to this for those audiences, precisely because we want to be very transparent, and we want to be able to articulate our story, our efforts, because those are important as well. But we've brought those into our parent events, our parent programming, and our parent groups, just to make sure that we're just being very honest and candid with everybody about where we're currently situated and what our efforts and plans are for improvement.
Ms. Capps. Well, first I just want to thank Ms. Parker for her, she took a lot of words out of my mouth. I appreciate just the sensitivity that these results, if you're working at a school that is not achieving as well, that you hopefully would feel motivated by these results, but we want to be sensitive to the feeling of there. But on your point about transparency, if you could just elaborate, if I'm, as I am a parent, how would I find this information if I'm, choosing or thinking about options? Where does it currently exist, if you can just be really clear about that?
We obviously, we send all of this information to our principals. We send it out. Many of them have gone as far as to send some components of this through their vehicles for communication. But in addition to that, it comes into the work of our ELACs, our school site councils. If you're asking specifically the question of where does a report like this live, that's a really great question. I don't know that it lives in any one particular place. Where we draw from it is in documents like the single plans, and that's represented there.
Sure.
So all of those are on our website. But I think we can do more around providing a more clear and kind of unfiltered view to achievement, to your point, just so that it's more readily available for parents.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, given the website is revamped and really easy to use. That would be a nice thing. If I could follow on, President. Because I know that this is wrote to you to some degree, but I want to go back to what Ms. Carey said at the beginning, that this, we now have 4 years, and I appreciated that context and that beginning, and because I think generally when you get results and it's just been 1 or 2 years, it's not as, you can sort of say, oh, it's just a snapshot, but this is, now we really do, this is an important report. And if you can speak to, and then you said a couple of things that I appreciate, Dr. Ramirez, about like being, not having very candid conversations and not sort of just being somewhat aggressive about taking this report and understanding and what can we learn from it. If you could speak to just an opportunity that, for example, a teacher who wants to know, hey, what the heck is going on at Franklin that's working so well? How would that actually happen? How would that exchange happen? Or how many exchange opportunities would there be? Because it just seems like we need to, I know you are, but I would love to just have you elaborate on how you're facilitating those kinds of exchanges between campuses. Thanks.
So I think and it's true of education in my experience, is that oftentimes we rely on those things, on those efforts to be more ad hoc, more intermittent. Some of our professional learning, specifically around balanced literacy, around our school leadership teams, have been about intentional coupling of schools, intentional focus on visiting one another's sites. So for example, Washington and Franklin are going to be partnered in several initiatives this year. Roosevelt and Adams are going to be partnered. And the reason for that is, we've been at this for about a good 6 months in talking about what partnerships might work, for what purposes. And one of the things that we know is that we want to encourage and foster district-wide collaboration, but really intentional district-wide collaboration. And I'll also say that for years now, we've had collaborative opportunities around professional learning embedded into our school year by way of our Art Wednesdays, which have been, I think, better and better each year, although we've still got a ways to go there. But also through professional learning opportunities. We had most recently at Adams, over 90 teachers from across the schools come in that second week of August. So the intentionality has increased dramatically for us to set the stage for some very important conversations to happen. The other thing from a leadership perspective is we have been really diligently at work these last couple of years in building capacity within our principals to operate collegially with one another. Principals also need the support of their peers and the support of us as a district in developing their capacity. They are the lone presence sometimes at a campus, and that can be a very challenging experience for them. So we need to make sure that they feel surrounded so that they can make the right decisions and also go after the right root causes, which sometimes don't present themselves as obviously as one might think.
My last question, just if you could clarify, what does that mean that Franklin and Washington are partnering?
So they're partnering around some very specific professional learning experiences where they to give you one concrete example, we've, for the last 2 years, and you saw a partnership with literacy partners around balanced literacy. So the design for this year is to have teachers at Washington visit teachers at Franklin, and vice versa, for 4 rounds or 2 rounds of what I would call home and away. And so those are opportunities to get into one another's spaces, see what's happening in the classroom with their kids, and the same kind of opportunities will exist for McKinley, for Harding, for SPCA, for all of our elementary schools. And that's just one example of us trying to move into more intentional ways of making sure that we're not just hearing about practices, but rather seeing them play out, you know, in the place where they occur with kids.
Thank you. Well, I hope that this spurs even more of these kind of ideas, and I'm sure that you'll be hearing them from teachers and staff. Thank you.
Ms. Parker?
Just in hearing about the partnering, I think one of the questions I would have is you've talked about partnering essentially the 4 highest performing elementaries with each other. And the question mark for me is, why would you not partner the highest performing ones with some of the lower performing ones to try to seed best practices that way?
Well, some of those opportunities are also opportunities to be very targeted. Not everybody is in the same place in the work. For example, Adams has been at the work of balanced literacy from the time that Dr. Alzina was a principal, and she got that work started. So we want to make sure that in these partnerships that we are advancing the work of those who are already well underway, and targeting very specifically and building up the practices of those where these efforts are more nascent. But we are going to be working. One other thing that I would like to represent is we have literacy coaches, for example, which is a different offering of support, where we are that group is working as a collective to make sure that they are bringing those practices along as well. So I just represented a couple of different examples, but in that work of school leadership teams, Roosevelt is partnered with Harding and with Monroe, for example. So it's not just, that's just one representation of that, but we are always looking for more intentional ways of bringing those practices to light.
Ms. Sims-Moton.
Thank you. I want to first thank you for this report, and I want to appreciate the comments by my fellow board members. As I listen, I think there's a huge piece that's missing here. I've heard us talk about our teachers. I've heard us talk about the district. I've heard us talk about best practice. But I think we're leaving out a huge important part, and that's our students. So how do we engage them in the successes that's going on, the successes that we have, and also the part about there's still work to do. So how do we engage them? Because in the end, they're really a big part of the success of this. And I just see them being left out in the conversations. It's being talking around them as opposed to including them in that, because I see them being, an integral part to being proud of the school and moving these things forward. So I would just ask, how do we include them?
One thing I'd like to say at the outset, getting around to answering what you just posed, Ms. Moton, is that in addition to how a parent would come to understand sort of how schools compare one to the other, when we send CASP letters home, that is very much about the individual student, where they landed in terms of the performance band, what their scaled score is, and moreover, sort of how to interpret what that means, and in an operationalized way, and also what you can do about that if you want to get better. So that's one way that is addressed to the parent, but still very much about the level of the individual student, and an invitation to about what can happen next. So I don't know how aware everybody is of what those letters look like, or how they come across to a parent and a student, hopefully. I think Dr. Ramirez will probably speak a little bit more to sort of developmentally what happens in grade 3 versus 5 versus, what I can say about the junior high grades and grade 11. So I can say to you very, very clearly that in our high schools around that college career readiness indicator And around, I mean, it's just sort of interesting that they're assessed every year, students are, and then they just aren't for 9th and 10th, but there's this one time in high school when they are. And even though it doesn't show up on the dashboard in the same way, it's got this college career readiness kind of weight to it that is a sort of kind of ultimate feeling weight. And I can assure you that certainly at our respective high schools, that it's something that's very explicitly discussed, not only because there is just that one administration, so we really need all students to participate in it. There isn't another time. And so I'm just kind of looking askance at Dr. Becchio, because he and I very recently have been involved in efforts to oftentimes go classroom to classroom, and not just, I don't want to conjure up like memories that I have at least that are somewhat traumatic around the years of API and CLB, where it really was about coaching to a test that was actually really hard to kind of get behind, because it was about discrete knowledge and sort of multiple choice. We are instead talking with students about why this is a kind of assessment that matters much more, not just in terms of how it makes them sort of seem on paper, but in terms of to do well on these tests the way they are designed as true performance tasks. It really is impressive. I don't know if you've had the opportunity, and we a lot of schools do this in their PTSA meetings and in other opportunities, but to just give parents an experience, and definitely to give their teaching faculty an experience of a performance task for math and what it takes to arrive at a level 3. In that way, I think we support our students, because we all talk about all these scores and, as you say, kind of talk around them. But experiencing what is being asked of them on these instruments goes a long way to supporting them, and then directly talking to the students about how this isn't just a test to pass. This is a true indicator of how much critical thinking you can demonstrate, how effectively you can communicate. Again, Dr. Ramirez would have to speak more to this, at how it manifests at the elementary level. So that's something that is extremely robustly engaged in the secondary schools, and particularly at high school, with even, classroom to classroom visits of all 11th graders. What is building out more in 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th is our conversation around the interim assessment blocks. So chances beyond just what we call our lag data, this kind of summative test data, as valuable as this is, and something as dipsticky as our Lexile assessments, something in between those two kinds of measures that is predictive of and a kind of formative, true benchmark of how students are progressing. So we are looking this year to really come to some agreements on what they call the IABs, the interim assessment blocks, how to be thoughtful and strategic about putting those in at 7th through 10th grade, so that students and their teachers, in concert with the Lexile data, really get to see what progress is an individual student making. This report by necessity is very much about the high-level view of cohorts, but in day-to-day practice, the level of PLC, or individual teacher with student, particularly in concert with Lexile and IAB data, it's all about how a student is showing progress toward that standard that we aspire them to reach. The last note I'll say about that is we're in the process now of developing a way of kind of giving students a kind of checkpoint on their college and career readiness. So halfway through your 9th grade year, how close are you achieving college career readiness? Some students will reach that in their 9th grade year, even at the outset of it. Others will struggle to meet that by the end of the 12th grade year, but to personalize their journey in that way, and to equip them with that kind of, just with that data about their own performance. So those are different ways that we've engaged students.
And I appreciate that, and I don't mean no disrespect when I said that, but that's really dry. How do you get them excited about that? I mean, I like where you're showing, like if you're doing like a United Way, you show your goals, a more visual piece, so you get on board with that. So I heard everything you said, and yes, we're hearing it at that level, but it's like, how do you engage them? And I know it has to be developmentally in terms of that, but how do you excite a first grader about that? There are ways to do that, so that's what I'm wondering in terms of getting excited about it as a school, even at the high level. Our school is doing this. And they can say, oh, we celebrate that, but we still have work to do. So how do you engage at that level? Because what you just said, all true and good, makes no difference to me in first grade, not even at this point, even, at the level I am. Just how do you get excited about that and want to really be a part of the success of the school, moving these bars forward and really on their level, helping them understand what that looks like and that they are part of that success?
I don't know if you want me to respond for secondary, and then I'll turn it over to you, but That reminds me of what we did in the NCLB years, where we'd have a big cake in the courtyard if we got that API of 820. Or so I would say, if anything, there's a little bit of an intentional gun shyness on the part of site principals to do some of those things you're suggesting, because they do call out this, we only care about what your test score is, not how your growth is as an individual. We'd rather coach that up in teacher-to-student interaction or counselor-to-student interaction, as the case may be. It's helpful in the 11th grade that built into it is the EAP, is a way for a student to validate to the CSU and UC system that they've achieved college. I mean, so there's an inherent incentive there that doesn't take too much revving a student up about. That would be a comment I would have about secondary, but I'll let Dr. Mears respond to about elementary.
But can I just respond to that? Not that I would suggest that we would celebrate the scores, but to celebrate it all around, because the work that you've done included all the cultural proficiency work we've had to do, the literacy you had to do. So I would say celebrate the whole and not just focus on the scores.
I think to your question and to comments, you're absolutely right. There has to be a developmental appropriateness to it, and the way to engage a 6-year-old in learning in some ways is very easy, but in other ways, this is an abstraction. It's not something that enters into their universe. As kids get older, as they get into 4th, 5th, 6th grade, these metrics, if you will, become a little more relevant, and students begin to own them. What I would say is that we, at least, I'll say me, I have not led with test scores, and that may seem shocking to you, but the reason I say that is because we are coming from an era that was very punitive and very narrow in assessing learning. So we have been talking about how to redesign learning. How do you get students activated around and owning their learning, not their results, their learning. That's where I will go into our work around balanced literacy, reading, writing workshop, where students have agency, or at least more so than that they're producing writing and reading, that they're self-selecting, that they have goals in mind for what to reach next, and that they're measuring against themselves. And then we get into other cultural practices that are also very site-based. Ms. Pinkley is here, and they have been on a literacy campaign for several years now. And it's been about reading. It's been about enjoyment and the pleasure of reading. And you're starting to see that data move, because there is a collective buy-in around everybody understanding their role relative to students. But it's really, as cliche as it may sound, it's putting the student at the center, because it's the student that ultimately has to do something with that learning and display learning. So it's been a shift, I think, from content to learner, from adult to the onus of agency resting with the child, that the schools that are further along, in my opinion, are the ones that you see there. If you go in, to be very concrete, if you go into Adams' first grade classroom during their reading block, you're going to see kids on the floor. You're going to see kids on beanbags in the little nook, their reading nook. To a traditional view, that seems like, I don't know what it seems like. But once you peel back the curtain and understand that there's a great deal of intentionality, and that you're seeing just a snippet, and that kids are engaged reading texts that are calling and inviting to them, that's where I think this really ties in for them. And you're seeing it culturally across schools, across that school, just to represent one. But that work is emerging at all of our schools. So that's how I would begin to answer that question around student voice and choice in this process.
Well, I appreciate that, and I just appreciate this conversation, because that's the piece that's not always first and foremost. It leads with some of the numbers, and you just kind of lose it. So that's what I'm saying in terms of that. I certainly know that work is going on, and didn't mean to imply that it wasn't, but it's not always up front to be clear about what it is that goes into that. So thank you.
Mr. Paredes,
So whenever I hear see anything that looks like a standardized test, I freak out inside, because I went through school Santa Barbara Unified, and I went through as many standardized tests as I probably wish to remember. And I've seen one of two things. I've either seen you have your instruction, then there's this jarring kind of event. You take your standardized test, and it may or may not align with what you were actually taught. You know, there might be terms, there might be things that just you never touched on. And then you see the opposite, which I think we saw around NCLB and other efforts where you just teach to the test. So I'm not saying teach the test, because God forbid we ever do that in this district, ever. But how seeing the CASP and seeing our instructional methods in the classroom, our curriculums, how aligned are our practices to prepare, you know, how fair is the CASP to what we're actually teaching, you know, how we're actually preparing them? And again, not teaching to the test, but is it a true evaluative tool, or is it missing the mark? And
That's a question. We're fighting over the response first. Let me represent it this way. In my opinion, a couple of things have happened. We have more robust technology that is better able to assess different domains and competencies of just learning. That's one component of it. So the standardized tests that maybe some of us were familiar with, ABC options, some of that still remains, but it's in some cases in a very limited view. These assessments are computer adaptive, almost personalized to the student, with thousands upon thousands of items that then make that assessment experience unique to the student. So what does that mean for our instruction? Well, one of the shifts that our school leadership teams, our staff is contending with is, how do you test not for rote memorization, not for factual knowledge, not for something that can be regurgitated, but rather for taking tools, learning, and making new learning from it, how to build on learning. And that's where we get into this idea of depth of knowledge. So the depth of knowledge would be completely creating new experiences for a world audience, if you will. Very different than anything that many of us ever experienced, where there was a very specific question stem, A, B, C, or D, you could choose, and that's typically how standardized assessment worked. And even that had its level of rigor in its own more basic way. So how do we assess for more integrated learning? How do we create opportunities for teachers to even have the freedom to be able to think in more integrated ways? Well, that's a significant shift. That takes a lot of learning. It goes back to the comment I made earlier. The ability to focus and be able to get good at one thing is incredibly important, and yet we have to be good at all things. And so I think that the most significant shift is that these new assessments are testing for a cognitive load that is completely unlike any assessments in the past. And it's why it's revealing that our instruction needs to come together, not in a one-off way with individual classrooms, but in the collective. And that's where this work of systems leadership is really important, because you have to come to consensus, and you have to have a common understanding of what do you mean by a depth of knowledge 3 or 4. And if you don't have consensus around that, then it's going to be very difficult for students to then display that on a standardized assessment, or in any assessment for that matter. So I think there's a couple of different nuances that have certainly shifted, but our teachers have been very receptive to that, have been really collaborating with one another in retooling and bringing over from past eras the experiences and experience that is frankly very relevant, but how to extend that into the new, not just content, but cognitive load that is expected of students in the new standards.
I would just succinctly agree and say that if the question is how valid is this assessment tool, I would say it's 100% faithful to the Common Core standards and the literacy standards. So any glimpse or any read of the standards will point exactly to the assessment tools that are as sophisticated as what Dr. Ramirez described. Where we see schools that are, I would venture to say, and I'm speaking from my secondary perspective right now, where we see schools who are outperforming other schools when controlling for demographics, it's because the classroom instruction better aligns to the Common Core standards and the way they're assessed than at other schools.
All right. Well, I think I support all of my colleagues and appreciate all of your comments. I would just, and I appreciate your reports and your answering the questions. I guess I would just go back to the transparency of best practices. I mean, the terms that you've spoken are, in academic speak, best practices, key initiatives by design, maintaining focus on key initiatives. I mean, so how can we make this language transparent to parents and students? And how can we engage them perhaps more opportunities at each campus? So I kind of look at Ms. Sims-Moten's comments of getting the excitement and engagement to that. So what practical things can parents be doing and students be doing, and can we have those discussions, and maybe we are, at the different school sites, just to provide an opportunity to bring that engagement on if it's not there. Clearly, and you can see more, obviously some schools more successful than others. I would say, though, I would like to acknowledge all of the hard work that the teachers are doing, because they are taking on these, the new math standards, the math frameworks, and they're trying to make sense of it, and they're trying to work and garner knowledge, and how can they engage their students that way. So I understand that, but at the same time, it's working at other places better than others. And I think the idea of that cross-pollinating, I guess, how often are these collaborations happening? And how deliberate and when are they happening? And what is happening at those moments of time? And what are and I think also it's the whole child, it's not just the test scores, I totally agree. So what, though, is working in some of these schools that is not working in others? And how can we bring the positive things that each of the teachers are bringing forward, but also have them feel that they're engaged in something of wanting to make a difference in their own schools?
Yeah, that was several questions. Let me see. The first one is had to do with how do we get more engagement from students and parents around this, and you said maybe we are.
I guess the practical what is practical?
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to say we're doing this and we're working together and we're teaming and we're meeting periodically and we're having these conversations, but what is actually practically happening? What are parents doing? How are they being supported to engage with their students to support their needs? Like, is there a study session or an engagement session for parents to understand the CASP report and then to have these discussions and understand what that means, exactly what they can be doing at home with their students?
Yeah, I would say several things in response, and part of what you said was it's all very academic, and it certainly is, and I want to venture to say on Dr. Ramirez's behalf and myself that we appreciate the time we're devoting to this topic tonight, because at the end of the day, we are a learning organization, and the results around our learning outcomes for students is our paramount purpose. I think that's part of why we inserted that instructional vision slide, to take that language register out of district initiatives and best practices and systems leadership to, can they read, reason, and communicate? Can they do it in 3rd grade? Can they do it in 6th grade? And can they do it in a way that demonstrates college and career readiness, whether that's in 9th grade or 12th, but by the time they leave our care, can they do that? And that's some exercises we went through to make something more comprehensible, more accessible. So bar graphs and scaled scores aside, can you read, reason, and communicate? And by the time you're in high school, do it so you have options, when you graduate. And that's what I was wanting to speak to more eloquently earlier, but didn't succeed as much with, is that instead of all these statistics, not that we don't have the responsibility to track that data and track those statistics, but those personalized conversations, that's not something that was endeavored upon before, and it is happening now, except for to coach a kid's performance up to these cutoff scores and things like that. you asked specifically, how can parents help? I mean, that tool that comes out, I know it's a letter and it probably is very, very dense, but it does point to several resources. It points to some video tutorials. It points to some things that are accessible for all. But I'm also hearing you say, what's something more local? What's something more personal and accessible to parents? I think in addition to the standing opportunities that there are through different parent education events, which do differ from site to site, I think there's room that we could get better at there. I'm hearing it tonight from the dais. I would actually use it as an opportunity to kind of invite more feedback and suggestions about ways that, again, I have experiences around inviting parents to engage with performance tasks at level DOK 3 and 4, and it's very engaging, and it's a game changer for parents who get to have that experience. So I think if we find things like that really kind of call the attention, they're just very efficient and very compelling ways of getting everybody through what has been, it's not an understatement to say, or an overstatement to say, it's probably the greatest paradigm shift in education and what we're going to see in our lifetimes, which is this move away from discrete knowledge and memorization to being able to be a critical thinker in an adaptive way. I mean, back to what we're floating as our mission statement. So I think as much as we can give students and parents practice with those kinds of tasks, which we know and which once they have the practice, they are very easily and quickly able to see very much resonate with real-world tasks, whether we're talking about industrial trades or we're talking about white-collar professional jobs. I mean, these are very real-world problem-solving, reasoning, and communication challenges. It just really resonates. It's inherently engaging. So to go back to Mr. Paredes Ulloa's question, you know, we don't like to say that we like to teach to a test, but if there was ever a test worth teaching to, it's this one. So I don't think we actually have to be that apologetic about, I wouldn't be apologetic about saying we're teaching to this test, because this test is, it validates my college readiness. It even lets me test out of certain remediation classes at CC, you know, or what have you, into entry-level courses, and it's inherently evident that it's connected to the real world.
I would also say that I would echo everything that Ms. Carey indicated. I would also represent that I'm doing a poor job of representing just how entrenched our principals, teachers are in communicating with parents at every turn, from the most informal opportunities to those like parent conferences, which are very standing times where there are entire days dedicated to that work, to being able to give information about where their child is relative to learning, so that they can move forward and have a more active role in their child's academic endeavors. The other thing that I would say is that we are seeking ways to demystify certain things about schools, and part of that is not all of our parents have the same funds of knowledge. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Many of our parents have, I would say all of our parents have incredible trust in our schools. And then there are those that cannot or don't have necessarily the background to be able to ask the questions that are important to ask, that are more intuitive to some parents, that are perhaps even obvious. And so, the programming, the supports, the pieces around language access and so on have been hugely important. It's part of the reason that we've put such an emphasis, and you saw just an expression last night around the emphasis around language access at Monroe. And that's just one example of how to exchange information so that there is an openness and that parents are inviting, because that really sets the tone. But from there, I can start to rattle off the specific activities, very similar to what Ms. Carey indicated, opportunities for parents to come in and experience science nights or math nights, and then understand how those shifts are taking place so that they can better just in a more tangible way, move into a space where they're really understanding what's happening with their kids. But admittedly, we can always seek to improve and be able to provide more actionable information in the appropriate, not moving away from the educationalese, right? Moving away and just plain speak.
Right.
Here's what we're trying to do for your child, and certainly if I were engaging with parents now, I use a very different register and a very different approach depending on my audience. But it's important that we find those practical ways of inviting parents in. But I don't think that we can understate just how important it is to set the right cultural tones for how parents come in or feel welcome at our schools. And in that sense, I'm very proud of the work that we've done. But admittedly, we can always improve, and we're open to suggestions around how we can do that more formally.
Thank you. And I just want to call attention to Ms. Binkley, actually, because I went on, when I went on the campus of Harding, I felt excited, like there was something going on here. And I remember when you got the new readers, and you were just all excited. That was like a few years ago. And I was just new on the board. But there was just like, everybody was just excited. Oh, yeah, they're all in this room. And, you know, and people were just, there was just an excitement around what was going on. And clearly, there's growth that we can see. So I think it's important to have that generated excitement and that passion that's around, and have these workshop opportunities for parents to get excited and know, what can I do? I know, like, you know, when my son was younger, it's like, you know, if I got that dense material and said, oh my God, he's a 2-3 and a whatever, and now what do I do? So then you kind of just put it aside. It's kind of like you get that notebook and you get the new lesson plan and you go, oh, this looks nice, I'll put it in the shelf for now. Because it's really the practical application piece. So I guess I would just reiterate the passion, the excitement that is generated, I think, on these campuses, seeing it last night at Monroe. And it's exciting to be able to see that. And so we do see some growth. We just need to keep on keeping on and providing those opportunities for parents to understand what they can be doing, for students to know what they can be doing, and for everybody, like Ms. Sims-Moten said, to get excited. So there you go. All right, I think it's time to move on. But thank you. And I think we're just going to move on to our next report.
But before we do that, Mr. Rouse, if you would leave that slide deck up, because I have comments to make about all of this. I enjoy listening to the board interact with our two instructional leaders. I want to make some big picture comments. The state of California results on CASP go as follows. ELA, 60% are above or exceeding standards, meeting standards, which is a good number. Math across the state is 32%. So this is a global issue, and it's at the State Board of Ed level. I mean, they are wrestling with this. Remember, we had the state board rep out here and said the State Board of Ed is really concerned with math. It's not just a Santa Barbara issue; it's a state issue. Something to note. I want to go to a slide. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, this will work. I want to celebrate something that's in this slide, and we haven't commented on it, and it struck me when I was going through this. Look at our high achievers, our white subgroup and our Asian subgroup, and we haven't really commented about them tonight. And I just want to call this out. I mean, we're hitting for Asian and white 77%, 80%. In the math space, 68 and 71%. It caused me to go back and look at the many districts that I've worked in a whole different context, Silicon Valley. And those two subgroups are rivaling the performance of some of the highest performing school districts in Silicon Valley. And I don't want to miss that. And I don't want you to walk out. I don't want our community to walk away feeling like we have a lot of work to do. And we do. I mean, that gap is huge and stubborn. But I also want to appreciate this. Okay, let's remember we have hundreds, if not thousands, of students that they're headed off to college. They're super well prepared, and let's just appreciate that. So now, as we transition to this next topic, and by the way, we have queued up all of these topics in order. We wanted you to see these results. We wanted you to wrestle with them because now the report's about dyslexia, about a redesign at Santa Barbara Community Academy, and a discussion of elementary instructional minutes. These are all tied together. So literacy. I would say the shift into Common Core and now to the Smarter Balance Assessment, the demand on understanding text has quadrupled. I mean, it used to be you could take the old Sat 9 test, it's A, B, C, or D. Some kids could probably figure out their way to a good guess. On these Smarter Balanced assessment tests, you can't guess. You are asked to construct an answer that is very text-based. The question comes at you with text. And so the demands on literacy have changed so much for education. Think about our world. We've become a digital world. So today, in order to access education, and I would say the best jobs, you've got to be literate. By the way, literacy also sets up the mathematics space because, yes, we need to teach numerical literacy, but it's also now how do you explain your answer. So this work with dyslexia, we're excited to give you an update. I know we have community members here that are very interested in this report. And so we would like to offer to Sherry Ray and Moni DeWitt to begin with your opening comments. We set aside 10 minutes for you to come up and share with the board and the community. And then I bet we have public comment. So we'll follow with public comment, and then we'll dive into the report.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Matsuoka and board members. My name is Sherry Ray. I am an author of this new book about dyslexia called Dyslexia Land, and an advocate who networks with dyslexia experts across the country. For years, I served as a dyslexia consultant for this school district. I'm also the mother of a dyslexic son who attended Santa Barbara schools. He finally learned to read when he was in 7th grade through private, intensive outside services, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day for months, at enormous expense. Thank you for putting dyslexia on the agenda. I wrote an editorial for The Independent that set our presentation in motion tonight. It is called Another Side of Paradise, on being the parent of a child with dyslexia in Santa Barbara. I described what is known as a dyslexia desert, a community like ours that lacks the kind of services available in more dyslexia-friendly schools and communities. 30 years ago, Superintendent Blas Garza commissioned a dyslexia task force in this district that cautioned that failure to provide appropriate interventions or expertise about dyslexia would, quote, contribute to the growing number of dysfunctional adults. Among its 11 recommendations are outreach to parents, collaboration among all educators, and training for all school administrators in state and federal laws to evaluate dyslexia policies and procedures. We can only imagine how respected Santa Barbara School District would have become had it implemented those recommendations and continued to build on them. And more importantly, how many students' lives would have been improved. The recent passage of California's dyslexia law, co-sponsored by our then Assembly member Doss Williams, and its guidelines added much needed resources for educators. I've heard a lot tonight about the balanced literacy approach, and I have to say that it is one that is ineffective for students with dyslexia, according to the International Dyslexia Association, because it does not focus on the decoding skills these students need to succeed in reading. It instead recommends the explicit and systematic approach known as structured literacy, noting, quote, there is substantial evidence that it is more effective for all readers, unquote. Reading is only part of the dyslexia story. You must also consider the emotional component and its lifelong consequences. Several years ago, a FCMAT report that studied this district's special education department noted, quote, students come into this district with learning disabilities and they leave with emotional disturbances. Unfortunately, that hasn't changed. I know a dyslexic elementary school student who says, every school year feels like 3. A dyslexic junior high student who admits, I always feel like school isn't made for people like me. A dyslexic high school student who attempted suicide twice. I met recently with a dyslexic 64-year-old teacher who said to me with tears in his eyes, I can still remember the horror I felt in 3rd grade when I realized how much more time I had to spend in school. The life chances of too many of these students who believe that they are stupid, crazy, and lazy diminish early as they seek ways to avoid their suffering, which includes truancies, self-harm, and substance abuse. They get into trouble with the law and they fill our prisons. I've been to teen court, the DA's office, the probation department, on behalf of some of these students. Too often, dyslexic students get passed along for years without the appropriate instruction that will give them the skills that they need to succeed, and then they are blamed and shamed for their lack of skills. If you're wealthy in Santa Barbara, you hire tutors, you send the kids to Lindemann Bell, you keep it quiet, pay for whatever you need. But even those wealthy students suffer emotionally. But don't get me started on the plight of students whose parents cannot afford a lawyer or find an advocate, who don't speak English, or simply just don't have enough money to pay the $200 or more a week, year after year, for a properly trained tutor, because these kids don't get the help they need in or out of school. Teaching dyslexic students how to read, write, and spell and succeed in school is no mystery. The only mystery is why we don't do it. The pattern of dyslexic strengths and weaknesses is far too often misinterpreted in the classroom. We could help support these students in their many strengths in so many ways. Offer American Sign Language or coding. Provide the latest in assistive technology with apps and easy access to audiobooks. Provide alternate assessments and project-based learning. And in line with the requirements of California Education Code Section 51204.5, ensure that students learn in the classroom that so many of our heroes were dyslexic, from George Washington to JFK, Albert Einstein to Steve Jobs. Please also remember that dyslexia does not go away. You learn to accommodate it and build on strengths. I know of several dyslexic employees in this district who have anxiety about the consequences of disclosure. The new HR director, Dr. John Becchio, knows a lot about dyslexia since we worked closely together on this issue for years. It is my hope that he will develop policies and procedures to address dyslexia for employees so that they will feel properly supported and no longer live in fear for their jobs. Dyslexia has been an issue in this district for 30 years. An outspoken advocate fought for dyslexic children here for 20 years, and I've been at it for 10. It is way beyond time to develop a comprehensive approach to addressing dyslexia, its strengths and weaknesses. But this time, please, do the right thing. Hire an outside and independent consulting team with proven dyslexia experts to develop a blueprint for best practices for the 21st century. We can't keep putting a Band-Aid on an emergency situation. And if you teach dyslexics to read, write, and read, reason, and communicate, you're going to increase your scores by 20%. Thank you very much.
Hello there. Thank you, Board, for this opportunity, and I also want to thank you for your public service. I think you are great volunteers, but I better get moving here. My name is Mooney DeWitt. I'm a local photographer. I do freelancing here in town, and I'm a graduate of Brooks Institute. I'm grateful to be doing what I love in a town that I love, and I, too, am dyslexic, as is my youngest son. I'm currently photographing a public awareness campaign supported by Kirby Jones Family Foundation called the 1 in 5, The Face of Dyslexia. Thank you so much, Bryn, over there. She's supporting us, and this is a public awareness campaign to help people really understand that this is rampant in our community, and we need to do something about it. Through this photojournalistic project, I've met a wide range of dyslexics who share their story, often through tears, recounting their struggles. I understand dyslexia and its impact on individuals and family life. I've experienced the obstacles many parents do when trying to advocate for their child's needs firsthand. Originally, I planned to send my child to public school, but because he could not get any one-on-one dyslexic intervention that was appropriate for his needs anywhere in the district, I had to send him to private school under duress. This was unexpected, and it had a ripple effect on our family. As a privately placed student, even under duress, services from the district are limited, and parents are forced to go to confidential settlements to get support. I've spoken to the board in the past about ending this practice of confidential settlements agreements because they require parents to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to receive remedial instruction. The only ones who really benefit from this approach are highly paid lawyers, certainly not the students who suffer from unnecessary struggles in the classroom, or the parents who lose important rights by signing these agreements and often need to hire attorneys just to understand what the legalese means, on top of hiring stuff for their kids already. I believe in literacy over legal fees every time. I think we need to meet these students' needs in the classroom and not the courtroom. And I'm concerned that this district, frankly, continues to be out of compliance with the federal law when it comes to dyslexia. A pilot program limited to a handful of students at a few campuses violates the rights of atypical learners who are left out. And there's a lot of them. The Individual with Disability Education Act, known as IDEA, requires that every student's needs be met under a concept known as FAPE. You can Google it, which is entitlement to a free, appropriate public education. Since 1 in 5 have dyslexia, this district of approximately 15,000 should be meeting the needs of approximately 3,000 dyslexic students to be in compliance with the law. Further, the district should be identifying those students under the federal mandate known as Child Find. Okay, so we must evaluate every child, that's what the mandate is, that it knows and suspects may have a disability. To leave this much larger need unaddressed is in violation of the law. Dyslexia and access to literacy has been called the civil rights issue of our time by the highly respected Yale researcher, Dr. Sally Shaywitz, who established the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. She regularly offers congressional testimony and shares her expertise. Shaywitz points out that while we're always seeking new knowledge about dyslexia, we have sufficient knowledge to do way much more. Rather than a knowledge gap in dyslexia, there's an action gap. An action gap. The board must have the courage to take action. They must make a motion tonight to implement the deep knowledge we have of dyslexia and ensure that this knowledge is translated into policy and practice. Pilot programs and Mr. Matsuoka's improvement science model, which starts with a small amount of students, is not in compliance with the law. Saying it takes time to build the will and capacity in a school district around any improvement effort does not line up with the IDEA, the Individual Disability Education Act. And it puts the district at risk, particularly if you have 11% and 9% for disability kids. The district's policy must match the law, and it must be visible to all, written on the website, and consistent even when there are changes in administrative leadership. So otherwise, we'll have thousands of students on the road to nowhere. Thank you very much.
So we have 3 speakers on item F2. Start with Pat Johnson, to be followed by John McKinney, to be followed by Lena Melendez.
Can we add one more speaker for that topic?
Sure.
I have the text of my, what I want to say that I can pass out. But I first of all want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm Pat Johnson, and I'm the mother of a student who graduated from San Marcos High School in the year 2001. That's 17 years ago. Throughout school, she struggled with reading, writing, and math. Her teachers always acted puzzled because this bright, enthusiastic student was obviously loved to learn, could not read or write. In 5th grade, she came home one day in tears. "Mom, what am I good at?" I listed all the things, and she goes, "No, Mom, in school." I said to her, "I won't lie to you. You can't read, you can't write, and you can't do math in 5th grade." So we tried to, this was after a couple of years of trying to get her assessed, and we finally got her assessed by the district. She qualified for an IEP. We were told, "Your daughter has a learning disability." Oh, when we told her, "Honey, we know what's going on. You have a learning disability," I remember the shock that was in her eyes. You could just see what was going on in her head, because she was the student in that classroom who loved to learn the most. She loved school. She loved learning. She loved PBS. Her teachers didn't know what to do with her. We didn't know what to do with her. Nobody knew what to do until a neighbor told me that we were going to have to hire an outside educational therapist. We took her to this woman. She diagnosed her as having dyslexia. Who knew? She also explicitly used all those techniques that we know about. Remember, this is 17 years ago. This woman knew what to do. Our daughter learned to write or to read and communicate, and now she has a PhD in geology, and even though she couldn't do any math in 5th grade, she has tutored college calculus. What if we hadn't had the money to find this therapist or the neighbor who just happened to steer us in the right direction? 17 years later, I am now an educational therapist doing those same things. And
30 seconds.
So we had to spend a fortune remediating our daughter. And there are families who cannot afford this. The International Dyslexia Association says there's 1 in 5, but they also tell us how to tutor these kids. I've gone to conferences that I paid for out of my own pocket so that I could do this for other families, for other kids, and it works. So thank you very much for your time.
John McKinney, to be followed by Lena Melendez.
I'm John McKinney, author, publisher, and the father of a dyslexic son. Daniel is finishing up his studies at Santa Barbara City College and getting a degree in marketing and communications. Many of you might have seen a lot of him lately. His smiling face is on a large poster on the back of city buses. He is the model student advertising City College on the back of our buses. And there he is, with a smile that would light up the world. But that winning smile was not often on display as Daniel traveled through the grades at Santa Barbara School District. Like the other 1 in 5 children with dyslexia who attend schools in the district, he and we parents encountered teachers and educators who did not know and did not recognize the early signs of dyslexia, teachers with little or no training on how to teach dyslexic children, reading programs, one after another, that don't work for students with dyslexia, and special ed staff, school psychologists, and administrators who were baffled by dyslexia, acting as though dyslexia was a rare condition, reluctant to use the D word, insisting on confusing parents by calling it specific learning disability. Say what? Finally, in the 7th grade, when our son was reading at a 2nd grade level, he got remediation, months of intensive and expensive instruction at Lindenwood Bell to bring him up to grade level in math and reading. But Dana was fortunate moving forward. With a few accommodations and the support of key administrators, most particularly Principal John Becchio at Santa Barbara High, and tenacious and nonstop advocacy by his parents, most particularly his mother. And with a lot of hard work and determination, he survived the secondary education system, a system not designed for students with dyslexia. Against all odds, he graduated with honors from Santa Barbara High School and was a top player on the Dons baseball team. Many of my son's dyslexic classmates were not so fortunate. Their dyslexia was never identified, remediated, and accommodated. The result was failure in school, increased failure now out of school, and increased difficulty now as young adults as they try to launch their lives. For the problem to be solved, it will take more than a consultant and more than pilot programs. I look forward to the day when I see a group photo of hundreds of smiling dyslexic students from district schools on the side of a bus, perhaps with the caption, "Every child, every chance, every day." For the 1 in 5 children with dyslexia, thank you.
Thank you. Lena Melendez and Luciano Gracia.
Okay, my name is Lena Melendez, and I have 2 daughters with dyslexia. Tonight I want to share my family's experience with my older daughter, who's now in 7th grade at GV. Sydney started off at a lovely Goleta school with really attentive teachers. And early on, they referred her. So it's a different experience that I had early on. They wanted to get her help. She went into special ed, resource instruction. She received quite a bit of it. We transferred to a charter school in second grade where there was a little more flexibility for learning differences. And the resource teacher there told us that Sydney was dyslexic. And just like hearing that the specific learning disability, it means nothing to a parent. But dyslexia seemed to mean something to us. We felt like we could do something about it. We were relieved. The resource teacher was really confident in teaching her to read, and it gave us confidence. But year after year, we kept hope, but the gains did not come as expected. Her reading goal was literally the same for 3 years on her IEP. At the end of 5th grade, the teacher suggested that we drop the reading goal and focus on inclusion. I initially agreed, but then quickly realized that would mean giving up on reading. So with talking to other people, dyslexia experts, I was encouraged to request a neuropsych eval, and this was done. It revealed so much more than the normal psych assessments. You know, it really actually showed more of her strengths, which was really enlightening. And so I expected that this assessment would guide the instruction to follow. But when I asked how this might be so, the teacher didn't have an answer. And she told me flat out that she viewed the assessment as proof that Sydney's dyslexia was just so severe, you know, even she couldn't teach her. To me, it was used as an excuse for her lack of progress over the last 5 years. So my urge to you tonight is to consider assessments as a useful tool and look at which ones are useful and not just use it as a formality for qualifying for services.
30 seconds.
Okay. And to not be afraid to try new things. Sydney's teacher was confident teaching reading using this one method, but when it didn't work and she tried it again and again, I wish she had sought other resources, tried something new. So now Sydney's in English support and at GV, and they're using the Fast Forward program. I don't know if this jives with her neuropsych profile. It's the only option. So I'd like to see our district offer more resources.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just another one, parent of a child with dyslexia. So nothing different than the story that you just heard from Pat 17 years ago, 20 years ago, from Sherry 30 years ago. So my daughter is now 10, so it's kind of recent, it's present, and nothing has changed. We find out about dyslexia because we start digging into the same announcement the school gave to other kids that, you know, your daughter has a learning disability. Dyslexia is not talked about at school. They even avoid saying that word, and that hurts as parents. My daughter is having a very hard time to go to school. What is unbelievable. So am I emotional? Support the school is close to none. Just to get an IP meeting took us like maybe 2 years. You know, going there and the IP meeting not prepared, psychologist not present, principal lost. The designated teacher for special education completely lost, doesn't even know what we are talking about. So there is nothing happening there. I'm so sorry to say that. The statement that we all have above our heads is not out there, guys. So we need your help to do something. Don't wait, do now, because there are so many kids out there that are being left behind. And that's just not school behind, because that creates way more. you know, way more to the whole family, in terms the whole community, in terms of financial stress, psychological and damage to my daughter that might be forever, and also that there is no support. As parents, we are lost too. If I didn't encounter those girls out there, I don't know what would happen to me, to my wife, or to my kids.
30 seconds.
So please, take that very seriously. I see like so much excitement and celebration and worries about the kids that, you know, are doing well. Those are good. They can figure out the things by themselves. But let's focus on the people who needs our help. We are failing them as leaders, as a community, as a district. They need our help, and if you don't do anything, they will going to be in trouble in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the speakers.
Thank you. Mr. Matsuoka, you're going to report on this topic.
Yeah, thank you for all the stories. My first year in this district was about hearing stories very much like yours. And I've shared some of those stories in public events. Year two for me was year one of this project, and we're here to report the results of last year. It's in the report, and I hear and respect the urgency around this. There are thousands of kids. At the same time, this is, I believe, we are moving into now addressing this topic of dyslexia. It was not really talked about. And I think the Assembly bill that called it out has been a real support for public education. It's saying we need to address it. And so we began that process with this pilot project last year. And I'm going to invite Dr. Jerice Butterfield up to open this topic. And Jerice, she's retired. She's here out of her good heart. She's been a long-standing leader in the special education space, especially in our SELPA. She is an expert in the field of dyslexia and the overlap with English language learners. It was really her guidance and consulting that led to the design of this program in the elementary space. And Dr. Butterfield, I'll invite you to come up and share your comments, and then that will be followed by Claire Kroc, who was our teacher last year in the pilot program.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to present, and I want to thank all the parents and folks that are here, because dyslexia is an area that is passionate to me too. That's why I'm failing at retirement and volunteering my time. I've been told that I've already failed retirement. Many of you know me as the former SELPA director. I'm also an educational therapist, and I've been an Orton Gillingham trainer for 25 plus years. So it was really exciting to me when the momentum was built in California around dyslexia and addressing it, and was invited by Mr. Matsuoka to come in and help. He called me the architect. Guide the project here in Santa Barbara. They wanted to do an early intervention project for students who demonstrated characteristics of dyslexia. And I know Santa Barbara has several students that have IEPs, that have a specific learning disability in reading, which is dyslexia, if it's not in and of itself a reading comprehension difficulty. And I've been very instrumental in getting folks to use the D word, dyslexia, because I think it's better understood. And we all need to start speaking the same language and understand what it is and how to remediate it. So in Santa Barbara, the project entailed taking one school site, designing a dyslexia intervention project for the lowest band of neediest kids, so that we could then implement a model that through much research and study we had developed at Santa Barbara County SELPA to then track and monitor data to see what kinds of results we could get so that this could guide not only further projects and working with students in dyslexia in Santa Barbara School District, but in the 23 school districts, LEAs, countywide. So the project started at Harding Elementary. We did a simultaneous project at Santa Barbara High School under Mr. Becchio's direction for students that were already identified as having dyslexia, but were at the high school level and still struggling. But at the elementary, and it had similar components, and they both were based on a research-based model. At the elementary, we know the research is very clear that it needs to be a group of 3 or less students in a group. And in the studies, the several studies that were done, students in a group of 1 did not progress more than students in a group of 3. So we set that band, even though that is really expensive. Many of our special education programs throughout the state, because I go to meetings with SELPA directors all over the state, or did, in special education, it's common to not even have those kinds of ratios. So it was based on that research, ratio of 3 students to 1 interventionist. Claire Kroc was the interventionist that was hired for the program. She attended a dyslexia interventionist certification program that we developed at Santa Barbara County SELPA. She was trained in Linda Moo Bell and Orton Gillingham program. And then which interestingly, programs are important and they're helpful, but the research says the program is the least important element. It's the experience and knowledge of the teacher. A good interventionist can remediate dyslexia if they understand what it is and what's needed to remediate it, but programs make it much more feasible for us. So we made sure that we had evidence-based, research-based programs. We did, guided Ms. Kroc to do very intensive informal assessment. This was not formal assessment like what you would get when you're seeking an IEP and special ed, but informal assessment so that we could see which students were the bottom performing readers in the 1st and 2nd grades and manifested characteristics of dyslexia. And I am all about early intervention, although I know we've got kids that are identified with dyslexia. We need to target them as well, and the district is starting that process. But early intervention is where it starts because the research shows that it takes 4 times as long to remediate after the 4th grade. So it's really important, and unfortunately in special education, it's a wait to fail model. Under IDEA, it's a wait to fail model. To get far enough behind that you manifest a discrepancy, you're usually in the 3rd or 4th grade. So to really start an early, and that's where the heart of the manual that was released by the California Department of Education focused was on early intervention. This isn't just a special education issue. This is a general education issue. We need to target these kids and give them the intensive targeted intervention that they need starting early on, 1st grade, even kindergarten, 2nd grade. So that was the age group that this intervention targeted. And then we did periodic assessment to see what kinds of growth the students were making. All of the students, and I know there's been presentations to the board, made exceptional growth, and I think Ms. Kroc will speak more in detail about that. The interesting thing for me was at the end of that year, most of a vast majority of the students went back into general ed. They had received enough remediation that they could be successful in their classroom, and I believe it was only 2 students went on needing that intensive intervention long-term and a referral to special education. So that's kind of my rundown on the project. We saw some similar results, even not as drastic because we're at the high school level now. These kids are going to progress much more slowly because the research tells us there's a ripe time for remediating dyslexia, and it is when those kids are little, when they're in the kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade. But we did do a small pilot at Santa Barbara High School, and we made some great gains there. And we're now expanding that to 2, or the district is expanding that to 2 secondary schools. And I will be providing some coaching in that model. And I think the district's long-term vision is to, make sure that all kids with dyslexia are being targeted. So that's what I have to share, and I want to tell you, I love this. It's volunteer for me right now, but I'm really excited about it, and I want to thank Sherry Ray for coming and meeting with me and getting me excited about it and getting me involved. So thank you.
I'm going to invite Claire Kroc to come up and share the results of the work from year 1. And she was the person who implemented the model, co-constructed with Dr. Butterfield. And Claire won't have time tonight, but she has her own personal story that is very much like what was shared tonight.
I sure do. Well, thank you. It's nice to see all of you here tonight. I'm really excited to share with you all of the exciting growth that we saw last year at Harding with our pilot project. Thank you. So as Dr. Butterfield mentioned, she talked about the elementary model, that we had 1 teacher with 3 students. We had thorough training and research-based methods, and I was provided instructional coaching by Dr. Butterfield. So we're going to start by looking at some of our results, and this slide looks at a phonics assessment that we used with our students to measure growth. And all of the slides you're going to see tonight are looking at pre-testing and post-testing. So this was an assessment where students were looking at their ability to decode words. It started with simple words like map and tap, and it goes all the way down to words like navigate and motivate. And so when we started the program in September of last year, you can see here, a lot of our students had a lot of difficulties decoding words. And after the intervention of the Orton-Gillingham-based programs, they were able to decode and starting to break the code of reading. They were working on their word attack skills. So you can see the average words they gained on the phonics assessment. Another aspect of reading we addressed is word recognition, the ability to recognize sight words. When students are reading, they need to be able to identify and read quickly the word the or of without having to stop. And so we looked at the pre-test. Students could read, all students averaged together about 50 words, 50 sight words when we started. And after the intervention, they were able to, on average, read about 300 sight words. So they're adding another tool to their toolbox of being able to read fluently, as well as being able to decode. They were able to now also recognize more of their sight words. Which brings us to fluency, which is where we're trying to get our students to, is be able to read accurately and fluently. And so when you take a look at this assessment, this was an oral reading fluency assessment. And on average, when we started, the students could read about 15 words a minute. And that's an average of 1st through 3rd grade students. When we ended, they could read approximately 50 words a minute. So they had gained almost 35 words a minute in the year of intervention. When you look also at their percentiles, when we began, students, all of the students, we were at the 14th percentile. They could read as fast as 14% of their peer group. When we finished the assessment and finished the remediation, they were reading at the 25th percentile in comparison to all of their other grade level peers, an average of an 11% percentile gain. Santa Barbara School District uses the STAR as a district-wide assessment. This wasn't an assessment we pulled out specifically for this program. This was information that was already collected by the district, but we did choose just to take a look at it. And what we found is that on average, the students in the literacy program gained a year or more of achievement on the STAR assessment. And this that is a big achievement. The STAR assesses, it makes students put together their fluency, their phonics, their sight words, and be able to read for understanding, answer questions, comprehend the text, and that these students were gaining a year of achievement on that test is a testament to the program. It's very likely without this model of instruction, these students would have had very little gains on the STAR test. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Matsuoka.
Yep, he can leave the clicker there because Mr. Shetler will come up. So I want to pause in the discussion of dyslexia, and I know this is going to be a point of contention tonight, but Brian, if you could go to the narrative. So, board, you read that slide and you read the narrative, but I want to put this grid up from the book that the board read, that the staff leaders have read twice now. It's the learning science model. And this grid, we could ignore it, but the author says if you go all the way to the bottom right corner, system-wide implementation on anything new, they typically fail because you've tried to implement it too fast. It's been my experience. If we try to implement something district-wide without training, without support, without coaching, without professional development, it doesn't work. When I saw this grid, I said, that makes so much sense of my experience with improving systems in schools and school districts. Now, yes, we have we have thousands of students who need support now. But if I skip all the way to the bottom right, I think the results would be average to mediocre across the program. So we started in the upper left corner. I wanted to see, and what I would say is the stories around Linda Mood Bell and parents going out to finding that support were consistent. You've heard it tonight. What I've argued is that we should do that inside of our schools, that we should provide that inside of our schools because a lot of parents can't afford it, or they don't even know that they need that. And so really what I would say that we've accomplished at Harding is we provided that support for the families at Harding. Now, we have many other schools. I believe that the results from year one at the elementary level have proven true. We're scaling up to now McKinley and Monroe. Now, if you remember back, you don't have to look at the slides, but of our schools that have challenges with ELA and literacy, those are two of them. And we have others. I think Cleveland would be next up. Now, where does this go? I believe this year we're probably in the small scale to moderate scale tests. We've gone to 3 elementaries. The high school effort was significant. Sherry Ray was helping with the model at Santa Barbara High School. The junior high experiences, it was interesting to note that a lot of the families noted it's junior high when things get really hard because now you have 6 teachers. You don't have a single classroom teacher, and the academic content demands just get so much higher. And the social emotional challenges are really difficult. So we want to see how this works at Santa Barbara Junior High. In the narrative, it talks about a 5-to-1 ratio. That's what Dr. Butterfield is recommending that we test. She believes that you can work with more kids because they're more mature. I wish we could work with 10 or 12 because it would be more cost effective. But she's been very clear. If you go too big, then the model doesn't work. So this grid, by the way, has been shared over and over with our leaders. It doesn't matter what you're trying to change in the system. You've got to learn small, but you've got to prototype and iterate quickly in order to serve all kids. So if we can go back to the slide deck, and I'm going to invite Doctor. You're going to get a doctorate someday, John? No. Mr. Shetler, there's been an interesting side benefit and overlap. We recognize that our special ed teachers need that training with supporting students with dyslexia, characteristics of dyslexia. And so we very quickly said, let's train our special ed teachers with the same exact training. So I'm going to have John comment about the work that's going on in the special ed space and how it will begin to address the needs of more kids.
Yeah, so I just first want to say that I very much appreciate that this is not an issue that special education is spearheading or trying to tackle on our own because we can't. And many of the students who need this help have not yet entered special education, and it's my hope that they won't need to. So we have begun training many of our special education teachers with a real focus on the elementary level in the same assessment techniques and practices as the literacy specialists have gone through. It is a 5-day training, 3 of which they get before they enter the classroom and 2 days while they're on the job, in addition to some coaching while they're working with students to make sure that they're actually implementing the training the way it was designed before getting a certificate. It matters for us that we're talking about dyslexia and special education because it really was not too long ago, maybe 2 years ago, that it was a bad word. We didn't use it. We talked about specific learning disabilities. Parents didn't understand what that meant. And in my role, I have the pleasure of working with a lot of families that are really struggling to navigate a special education system that is not parent-friendly. And so just being able to openly talk about dyslexia is freeing for us. In the last year, I've had psychologists contact me, teachers contact me, and ask how they can use the word in a report or when talking to a parent. And so we're experiencing that change in, I think, a very meaningful way, and just being open about the fact that these kids that we've known all along have been struggling with dyslexia, and we can call it by what it is. We can also respond intentionally when we know that there's students who are struggling with dyslexia. So the training focuses on which interventions are effective for students with dyslexia, and our teachers are more and more equipped to give kids the right help. It's going to take several years to build the kind of capacity that we want to build, but I feel like we're on the right track, and I'm excited to be a part of this work.
Okay, and then if you'll just click to the next slide for me. You've got the clicker. Oh, go back once. One more to the right. There we go. So Margie Ayavi is here, and I'm going to invite her up to share her support and work in this space. She attends a lot of our meetings. She's more than the executive director of SBEF. She's gotten very educated about this dyslexia space. And there's a dollar amount up there. This is the amount that the Ed Foundation has raised towards this work. And that number will probably grow as the weeks and months go by. So I would invite Ms. Ayavi to share her comments about the importance of this work for the Ed Foundation.
So, hello everyone. I want to thank Sherry and Bryn's here tonight with the Kirby Jones Foundation. Those two were the ones that sat in my office year after year after year to talk about this issue. It was something that needed to be done, and the two of them brought it to my attention, and finally the district is making steps to do something about it. So I applaud the effort that you guys are doing, and I really appreciate you guys for bringing it to our attention and to the community's attention. We have raised this year $167,000. There was 3 foundations that gave $116,500. It was the Walter J. and Holly O. Thompson Foundation, the Stone Family Foundation, and Women's Fund gave us $50,000 this year. The rest of it has all been raised through individual contributions. I think that really says something about how this resonates with our community. Many of you on the dais are contributors that have given to this project yourselves. Many of you guys have all been giving to this project as well. Our Santa Barbara Education Foundation board has donated to this. My staff gave $5,000 of their own money for this project because we really believe that it's important, and I'm really proud that the community is stepping up and supporting this effort. We even have Facebook friends. We posted your video that you had on Facebook and put a donate button, and we had various amounts of Facebook friends donated $660, ranging from $20 to $100, which I thought that was really a nice gesture too. One individual, Sandy Schofield, gave $15,000 in honor of her dad. And I just want to reiterate the story that she's telling. Her dad was born in 1907 in South Carolina, and he couldn't read. He couldn't read and he couldn't spell. And a neighbor or somebody came to his aid, helped him. He ended up graduating with honors from MIT. He went on to be instrumental in engineering the design of the Corsair fighter aircraft. And what she says is, I think about the young children who might not ever have the help that my father got and end up never reaching the potential either for themselves or what they might have been able to contribute to society. So she's so moved that she's gave $15,000 of her own money to support this effort. I think it really says a lot about our community that's standing behind this, and I really appreciate everybody that's here on this behalf, and let's all work together, and let's do this.
Good.
Any questions?
I'm sure the board will have comments and questions for all of us. I'm going to invite Dr. Butterfield up just to make some closing comments, and then we'll let the board comment and ask questions. And Brian, if you'll click more.
Again, I want to thank the board of Santa Barbara Unified School District for taking this on. You're the first district out of 23 in Santa Barbara County that has supported and taken action to look at dyslexia and approve programs and funding that specifically targets dyslexia. I know it's a lot of work, and I understand all of the parents, what you talked about tonight and how important it is. We do need to expand this work, and we do need to look at the students that currently have IEPs as well, and make sure that in a systemic way that we start addressing those needs and take this information that we've learned from the pilots and make sure that this eventually goes to all of the schools that serve young children, because like I said, this starts in general education. We don't want it to be a wait to fill model. So I want to thank the district for their work and hope that you, in moving forward, will not move on to something else right away, and will stick with dyslexia for a while and make sure that it is being addressed in the district. Thank you.
All right, well, I want to just thank all of our speakers and parents and the passion and the sadness and the hopefulness also. And I also want to just thank the community. But I will speak later. I want to first look to my board colleagues and let them speak first. So I know Ms. Parker is sitting there ready to go.
Thank you, and I appreciate everybody's comments and summaries and the direction that we are going in general. There are some things that I wanted to say. One is that it's part of being the senior member of the board and having been on this board since 2006, and I'll share that I don't, in terms of administrators, there were some people who were working on the district with me, but in terms of what was going on at the district level, there's been pretty much complete turnover. Even before I came on the board, there was, Linda Mood Bell was piloted at 2 of our elementary district schools, and it didn't work. The results were not good. And I don't even know, it was before I came on the board. It was just before I came on the board, so I did hear about how how it had not worked. And it could be that it was because there were too many students in the group or however it was structured, but it didn't work. And then in 2011, the district turned again to Linda Mood Bell in the hopes of doing more for our students with dyslexia, and 38 teachers were trained. But it was, in speaking of talking about that grid that you put up, it was going immediately to system-wide, and it failed. And so I very much appreciate this much more laddered approach to it, and expanding it over time, because we have evidence that going straight to system-wide did not work. And so I'm much more hopeful this time. And this time I feel like it's different in that we have a multi-year systemic plan. And it was always just quick, address everything and fix everything. And then actually nothing got fixed. And so I am hopeful, and I'm very appreciative of the way this program is expanding quickly out of a first-year pilot program, and moving to address the issues with more students. I want to be sure that our students that are identified as special ed with dyslexia, that they are getting this service now. That they are getting these opportunities now, and a lot of them actually have been. I mean, we haven't talked about this, but the reality is that a number of our special education teachers are trained in this, and I know that at least in certain pockets of it, that these students have been getting similar services at the with direct instruction from special ed teachers. But I also really appreciate Dr. Butterfield's point, and what everybody knows, that this needs to be done well before a student, the best intervention is well before a student gets identified through a gap and discrepancy in reading achievement. And so to get to that level is what we're really talking about. And I mean, we absolutely must continue to remediate for our older students, but the key here is to really roll this out across with our younger students. And that, I think, is the positive way to go. And one question I have, though, is that I can tell parents here and community members here that probably nothing drives the board more crazy than seeing that specific learning disability, because it comes before us quite often. And we're all like, what exactly are you talking about here? For whatever issue that comes up, it's very frustrating because we know it just adds a veil of there's something wrong, but we're not going to tell you what it is. And so my concern with these younger students is they aren't identified as special ed. And so we've talked about characteristics, they're showing some certain characteristics of dyslexia. Dyslexia affects far more than literacy. And so my concern is that in being so careful around, well, we don't want to say your kid has dyslexia because they are just showing characteristic signs of it. Maybe we can remediate them and they'll never move into special ed. Parents need to know and understand that this is a global issue, and that there are other areas that their student may be, or their child may be affected, that they may be able to read at grade level, but that there are other ways that they may be affected, that parents, there are opportunities there that parents should be taking. And so I want to be careful as we move forward that we educate parents whose kids we're pulling into these programs, and so that they know and that we're transparent and that they can be part of it too. And so that's a concern that I have. And I want to apologize, but I have a 14-year-old that's waiting for me. And I'm going to have to leave now before I hear everybody else's comments. And I know that there are going to be a lot of comments here, so I want to give you the space for that. But I do want members of the public to know that I will be watching what my colleagues have to say, and then circling back with district administrators to share my thoughts further. And with that, I'm going to have to say good night.
All right. Safe travels. Any other board comments, questions?
Yes, I'll go. Just to pick up on that last point, because that was something that, I really appreciate the parents who are here, and it's so clear how hard this is, and I just sympathize. And but the one sort of tangible thing that came out for me was the way in which you all found this information was conveyed, and I'm just the fact that we have Mr. Settler here and Dr. Wagnick, is that something that can be changed? That this sort of broad learning disability initial assessment can be. I mean, it just seems like one very tangible comment, and one that my colleague Ms. Parker picked up on as well, but if that could be something that we could explore improving.
Yeah, absolutely. We could do a better job of being clear with families What we don't have control over are the categories that students qualify under for special education. And so the category for a dyslexic student is still going to be specific learning disability. That's one piece of information. As Dr. Butterfield shared, when we have a student with a specific learning disability in the area of reading, and we exclude reading comprehension, we're talking about dyslexia. And our folks can have that conversation and are having that conversation more and more at IEPT meetings. So we don't diagnose it, but we know what it is when we see it, and we can get better at being open about that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Thanks.
So actually, I want to acknowledge again the speakers and the parents and the community and the work that has gone into support efforts in dealing with dyslexia. I think what I have gleaned from this conversation and in conversations with many of the community members as well as Mr. Matsuoka and the reports that we've been provided is that this process that we've started, this pilot program, has actually uncovered a great process that actually needs to be replicated and grown. I respect the idea of this, how we might grow that and what that looks like, that we can't jump from 0 to 100. But I also feel that I would want to know, I have questions on perhaps a more pointed approach as to what happens after this year. So I know that you are in the process of looking at evidence-based information with regards to the pilot program, but I guess I'm seeking, wanting to know how can this be rolled out in a more systemic way and systematic way once we get this, perhaps this next pilot completed. And would that, I guess there's a couple questions that come with that. Is there a plan for all the special ed teachers to be trained in this? I know we have 17, but is there a plan for that? So I'm kind of looking at systems thinking right now. Is there a plan for gen ed teachers potentially to be trained? Because honestly, that's where they first come into the classroom in the gen ed experience. And so I guess maybe you're not at that place yet, but I want to know that if this, and it seems to be successful, it seems like the rollout is going well and there is a certain plan of attack, what are next steps? What is the plan for the district in terms of, you know, what is the district's expectation for students with dyslexia to be served? What is the hope there?
I'll answer some of your questions, and then I will look ahead to an update once we get some data. So this part of that book, Learning to Improve, they talk about improvement cycles, like implement, collect data, assess, and then figure out the next iteration. So the other consent item that was pulled, and we'll talk about it when we get to it, the program evaluation piece is going to look specifically at an evaluation window in late October, probably about late March, and then June. So we will have a first glimpse of system-wide data now across 5 schools, and our special ed students as well. We're going to evaluate that work. But specifically the 5 teachers who are doing this, by October we'll have a pretty good sense of, is the scaling working? So it's easy to test with one teacher because we can focus all of our supervision evaluation. I am convinced that the elementary model is the right model. The question is, can we scale that in the hands of other teachers? Right? Can we supervise them? Can we coach them? And then, so I think we'll look at the results. I think we need to make some program and budget decisions probably in the February window. So we'll have an idea of what's working by that time. So I will commit to the board to give you an update about what is version, it would be 3.0 in the 1920 year. I think my sense is the focus on the K-3 space is the priority. I mean, it's just very clear. If you remediate that early, it eliminates, just future issues. The challenge is we have students who are in our secondary schools who have, just have experienced, 6 to 7 years of, lack of support. So we need to attend to that. But if you're looking at the whole improving the system, if we can get the pipeline better, where our K-3 literacy results are resolved, at least for this population, we're just going to be better off.
Isn't it true, though, that if we have an opportunity, if we know that this is working and we have special ed teachers being trained, for example, 17, that it would be a benefit to our district that all of our special education teachers are trained in this, that we start thinking about gen ed?
So I think we need to remember when we talk about all of our special education teachers, they serve a much wider population of students than the ones we're discussing today. Within that, our teachers with mild, moderate credentials are the ones who are working with our students who have dyslexia. And we're getting to the point where we're going to have more teachers in our elementary schools with this training than not when it comes to special education. In secondary, the system is not set up so that all those teachers are teaching reading intervention, but the ones who are the ones who are going to need that training. And I do think that we can get there, but I just want to say we know that this worked under the conditions that we had it operating last year at Harding. We're now testing whether or not we're going to get similar results at the junior high and high school level with different populations of kids. So I do think we need to let the data guide our next steps, and we're all interested to see how things are going in October.
So are there additional resources that are provided to the special ed teachers around this currently, or what are those resources?
When they go through the training, they're provided with the instructional materials that will allow them to go in and implement what they've been practicing. So that's what we purchase for them along with the training. But again, I want to just caution that we need to make sure that this is effective for our students. Some of the other points that came up around our older learners is there are other issues that we also need to attend to. How do we make sure that they understand their disability, that they understand which accommodations are going to give them access to rigorous coursework, whether it's audiobooks, how do they advocate for themselves, how do they understand that they are intelligent even though they may struggle with reading, and the whole social emotional piece I think becomes just as, if not more important for some of our older learners. Not to say that we can ignore the fact that they need help in reading, but it's one of many issues by the time you're talking about teenagers.
And then are there data tracking processes in place that the special ed teachers that have been trained in that will be continued on and perhaps developed for the other special ed teachers?
For those that are participating in the pilot, absolutely. For those who have received the training but are not a part of this pilot, the data tracking is not as tight or coherent. And so a lot of it depends on individual student IEP goals and looking at other data points that the sites are collecting, like STAR test results.
So essentially what we're learning is that we're going to be piloting this second year, and then we're going to be given evidence or data that is going to either confirm or challenge what we do next in terms of training our staff, as well as the take-up of students being supported in with dyslexia. So I would just hope that at that point, or if not sooner, if we see the results, that we can see sort of what's the next step in terms of a systemic plan to ensure that, I know we can't go from, again, 0 to 100, but I'm hopeful to think that that we'll be able to be more comprehensive in our approach to be able to, affect change in terms of students being able to read and write and be literate with dyslexia.
Yeah.
I'm going to comment about this project. Last year when we ran into, it wasn't hurdles, but just some learnings at Harding. Said, okay, that's not exactly working. So we did some pivots. All right, we're not going to wait a whole year. Like, if something's not working in our secondary model, then we got to figure out and fix it. We don't need to wait a year, but we need to get some data and feedback to know, one, is the model working? Two, you know, our high school master schedules, they're hard. It's an inflexible 20th century model that we're trying to figure out how to deliver this service. But we have to examine some of the assumptions about time and how the day is structured. But see, we're pushing this model into a high school master schedule that's been around for 50 years, especially in the special ed support space. So we're trying to figure out how to get through those barriers. Dr. Butterfield is, you know, she's had a lot of experience in that high school space. So you have my commitment that, as we learned, we will give you updates, and we will provide a roadmap for the next iteration.
All right, and I also want to thank Dr. Butterfield, because I know, I appreciate also her statement, and also you, Mr. Matsuoka, that of the 23 districts, we are the only one actually doing something. So I think that's a really important statement to make, that there is work going on, there are piloted programs, there is great results that we're seeing, but there's more to do. Mm-hmm. And we know that we're aware of that, and that we will be a part of that process of improving and making change in this area. Ms. Sims-Moten.
Yes, and I too want to thank you for coming out and sharing the stories. And this is a future question, but more of one of collaboration. So I keep hearing about early identification. So working in the early care and education community, how can we collaborate and have our students coming into the TK system a little bit stronger with that? Are there strategies that we can look in the early, those earlier years to be able to identify some of those things? So you may not be able to answer that tonight, but I would love to have a later conversation about how we start to look at that, earlier. If early identification is the key, then how do we get involved at that level?
I love that we have the executive director of First Five sitting up here.
All right, well, if we have no more comments, thank you again. And we will move on to our next.
Can we skip down to SBCA redesign?
Yes.
Okay.
We're going to skip down to number 5, report Santa Barbara Community Academy redesign proposal, Mr. Matsuoka and Dr. Ramirez.
All right. And the clicker is back up here.
Do we have
I want to begin by acknowledging the Santa Barbara Community Academy staff who is here. And this is what we do on Tuesday nights. We have board meetings. We hope that they end, at a reasonable hour, but thank you for coming out and for staying. And I hope you learn from these other 2 topics, because it's really part of your work. I saw a heads nod on both topics around CASP, but also dyslexia. So this topic, I'm going to be the main presenter here, and I'm going to invite Ms. Scharfeld up. She's going to add some commentary about the work that she has been doing with her staff. All right, so here, context, what is this about? Well, the narrative talks about when OAS was closed, the board asked very specifically, what are we going to do to continue the models that were part of that school inside of our district? If you remember, the first attempt was to try to build a model inside of Monroe. And we started the conversations there. I ran into a few headwinds, so to speak, because they felt like, well, we're good. What do you mean you're going to drop this program on us? They were open to it, especially around the social emotional learning component. But it was when the charter petition came to us, and I walked away from that evening thinking, Santa Barbara has been a champion of alternative education models. And so I did some thinking and writing, and that energy turned towards Santa Barbara Community Academy, because we have a school that needs some redesign work. And you're looking at the enrollment patterns. You saw this slide without the current year. Well, now with the current enrollment at 210, It is reaching a point of something needs to change for this school to survive. I mean, it was 300 for the long haul. It is now 2/3 of that number. There is no kindergarten cohort this year. We talked about that at a board meeting in the spring. In the first grade, there's only one section. And so here's a breakdown of grade by grade. You can see it. And the K3 average is small. Contract average is 25-1 in K3, and the contract average in 4 through 6 is 32?
Oh.
32? Or 33?
It's 30 with the max of 33.
30 with the max of 33. Okay. So a redesign effort is being proposed, and this document is not the redesign. It's just laying out a path to doing this. But the three themes that have emerged, at least in our conversations at the cabinet level, but also it resonated a lot with the staff. You guys were on a parallel track of talking about what's important for the future, and balanced literacy, social emotional learning, and some work around integrating the curriculum around science. And I think STEAM is it's a great organizing theme. We've got to figure out how we work in science instruction. Left as a separate piece, it gets left out of the day. And then melding in the art. And then engineering in a very elementary appropriate way. You talk about student engagement. If they're making stuff and learning by doing, I think that's going to engage kids. Some of the other parts that I believe need to be part of this redesign effort is to take a look at how we use time. And if we get to that last report tonight, if we're, have the energy, the elementary master schedules in our elementary schools, Dr. Ramirez pointed it out, the demands that have been placed on our elementary teachers since Common Core, Next Gen Science Standards, and all of this work, but the school day hasn't changed. And so we're really just running into a crunch of time. I believe we need to look at a more creative use of time. I think that actually needs to be looked at K-12. I mean, our high schools they're factory models of the past, but let's just focus on this elementary space. So who's been involved in this process? It's been a lot of the three people at the top with Anna Scharfeld at the school site. Dr. Marianne de Medio-Caston is very interested in this topic. And she and I are going to meet next week. I mean, we talked several times last year about, she just has so much passion and energy about elementary education. Terry Allison, if you know her, she is the founder of Storyteller, which is a preschool that addresses the needs of young children who have dealt with very difficult life experiences. I mean, she's an expert at implementing social emotional learning in the context of a preschool. I think she has a lot to offer us in the social emotional learning space. And when I mentioned this to Dr. Carmel Saad, who's our implicit bias instructor and researcher, she was really interested in what we were doing. She doesn't know how she'll participate, but she's a researcher and she's a psychologist. She cares a lot about how kids develop. We've invited the entire SBCA staff to be part of this redesign effort, and thank you for being here tonight. And we're going to invite a couple of STEAM educators from our district. They are secondary teachers, Amir and Emily Shire, who have a passion K-12 about STEAM, and we think they can be helpful. They need to let the elementary educators design it, but they have lots to share about their ideas. All right, so this now comes to the fast prototyping entrepreneurial mindset that I'm such a fan of. We need to develop a prototype on paper by October 1st. That's in about a month. And the reason for the urgency is the model really needs to be finalized by November 1st because the open enrollment window begins December 1st. The explanation, the communication of this, what is this new model, has got to be understood by a parent out in the community. And so we've got to prototype this quickly. I hope we can bring a prototype to you, school board, around October 9th, but I'm just going to say we might be able to. It just depends on where the design team's at, okay? And that thing's going to be a first or second draft of multiple iterations, all right? We want the board to be informed, but ultimately it's going to be the design team that's going to come up with this model. I'm going to invite Anna Scharfield to come up and just share what she's been working on with the staff. I gave her, I don't know, about 2 hours to think about what she was going to say. But she always has a lot to say. She's just an instructional designer. And so she's going to share what she's been working on with the staff at the school.
Yeah, so I had a lot of notice for this, but, and when I'm not prepared, I tend to say a lot of jokes, so I'm just going to start, or I just say things that I'm saying right now, but I'll get to it right now. So, first of all, I would like to thank you all for supporting SBCA in this redesign. And I just want you to know that I have worked at 8 different schools. And this staff is probably the most dedicated as a whole that I have ever worked with. And there's not a single grade level or a single teacher that I wouldn't put my niece in. And I have never said that about any school. So is it perfect? No. Nothing's perfect. But I think they care about their students. They love their students. They want to learn. And they really want the best opportunities for their students. So, but we have a lot of work to do in order to meet that new mission of that we are going to prepare students for a world that is yet to be created. And so, but I think with this staff and with this ability to create something new, we can find that answer of how to do this. And so we don't have that answer right now, and we might never have it exactly because it will constantly be changing, and that target keeps moving. But we are currently right now developing this mindset of improvement and understanding that it is about responding to students that is the key. And it's not about what we like, it's not about what we want, but it's about what the students and our families really need. And that is what's going to ground us in this redesign. So we are starting this journey. We started it at the end of last year. It's definitely challenging because we are working day by day, yet thinking about this future possible redesign. So what we did is we started with a causal analysis at the end of the last year to really kind of figure out what the root causes are. Why aren't people coming to SBCA? And there's a lot, and there's a lot of systemic reasons why they might not be coming, but we really can't change those. So our job as teachers and as the administrator there is really thinking about what we can do to, what are the root causes that we can control, and what are the right drivers that we can focus on to improve the academics at SBCA. So we can really only control the learning and the experiences that are happening. So we're really this year have been working on these major shifts in instruction, and I feel like I'm hoping that the teachers here don't break, because they are shifting their instruction like I've never seen before. And it's a long road, and we are on that at the beginning, but I think as we start to we took a deep dive into our CASP scores. We're looking at what can we do for that day in, day out. It's really about student thinking, and how are we meeting those needs and not just a number. So we really feel like there needs to be this strong base for literacy and mathematical reasoning. Those math scores just eat at my heart because that was my major. And so this is something that I really, really believe in. And I saw it at the high school when I was working there, that the 9th graders, or at Santa Barbara High School,
I'm just used to saying it as the high school because I went there, and it is the high school in Santa Barbara. So I will correct myself, but I think, you know, watching those ninth graders, it's in the math classes where the behavior issues and the problems occurred. So I think we need to have a very strong math instruction, and so we're starting to create that shift there. Our test scores might not show that next year, but I know over time, if we continue this path, we will get there. And so I think it really, the other thing is that, so we really want to develop this place of curiosity. There has to be this balance of students building knowledge and through reading and experiences while they are cultivating the curiosity to drive inquiry. And so we know that Velcro, when you have a lot of Velcro, a lot of things stick. And so we have to create this opportunity so students have that Velcro so more things can stick. But so we're kind of exploring right now. We're exploring different types of models. How can we create time? There's high demand, I mean, you've heard it today, and there's high demand on our teachers to really think deeply. Our students are now required to really think deeply, and that takes time. So how can we shift our days so that there's longer blocks of time to really engage in that, and then to create time for our teachers to really have the time to really think deeply, analyze data, and talk about what are the next steps. So our teachers, we've been working on Saturdays. We are working on minimum days. We are coming in during our intersession, which is their summer and my summer, which is the first time I've never had, and it's kind of hard, but we're going to be working because we really believe that we can create something, and I think if we build it, and we do a great job, I know Santa Barbara, you don't have to sell things, it's word of mouth. And if something is happening really well, people will start to come. It might take a while, so we might need some help at the beginning, but I really do believe that if it is anything like what is in my head, it will be amazing, because what's in my head right now looks amazing. So that's kind of where we are, and there, and I'll stop. Okay.
There's one slide that I didn't put in. It is in the narrative. The question of which school calendar is part of this, and we've spoken with the staff. The staff was actually neutral last year. They said whatever helps generate student enrollment. We're recommending that Santa Barbara Community County shift to a traditional schedule next year. We've just heard enough barriers and stories about families having older kids, different schedule, and then the alignment with La Cumbra and the facility. Access to professional development for the teachers. You know, they can't participate because they're on a totally different schedule. So I am coming out to a PTSA meeting. I think it's in a week or two. So I'm going to explain to the parents really a background on this and why we are going to shift the calendar to traditional. It's important for the staff to know that because they have to start making plans for next summer. Okay, so just last comment. All right, so now we'll turn it over to the board for comments and questions.
Mr. Perez Ulloa.
One, yes, I call it the high school too, and people don't know what I'm talking about sometimes. But as I mentioned earlier when we talked before, I'm super excited about this. When I was at Antioch doing my master's program, I was handed a book called Schools That Learn, and I was like, that's funny, because I don't think school buildings can learn. But, you know, because I feel just like we've kind of had this education system for so long, this kind of like framework that you know, I was kind of, I've been a little cynical about, going like, it's not really going to change. You know, we're kind of stuck with this Henry Ford model where we just kind of stick kids in rows and this is how it's going to be. But to be able to see something like this and to hear the enthusiasm and all the hard work that you're putting in, bless you all for putting as much work into this as you have been, because, I mean, it's not easy to sacrifice all your free time and all your minimum days to do this. but to hear about all this work and you know, as an education nerd myself, just to hear that you get to really kind of reinvent your school and make it what you want and make it what is responsive to the students and the parents is just very, very exciting for me. And I think you have such a great opportunity as educators yourself, but also us as a district to really show that we are adaptable as well, that we are a district that can learn, that can grow, and can be responsive to our community as well. It's just, it blows me away. I just feel so fortunate to be in the room with you all today and to be part of this district during this time period. This is, I think, why so many choose to be educators, because they really feel like they should be able to take the keys to their own education and really help drive it. And you all as educators get to kind of create the car for them and make sure that when they drive off the lot, they have the best, the best model that they can have. And again, I just commend you all for the hard work. Anna, thank you for really leading this. This is, I'm really excited about this, as I said. I try to be, realistic as well, but, it kind of gets away from me because again, my idea of what this could turn into is freaking amazing. And so I want to make sure that we keep working towards that image that you all have in your head to come to something that is not only, high end for our students and for our teachers, but also serves our community, serves our goal, which is to create reasoning citizens that will be able to give back to our community, but also prepare themselves for what the future brings tomorrow. And unless any of us has a crystal ball, none of us really know what's going to come tomorrow. But really creating that space, that place for our students to become prepared and for us to prepare them is again, I think, just really a blessing. And I wish you all the best of luck, and I support you. I can't speak for everybody, but I support you in this effort. And I'd love to sit in one of your brainstorming sessions just to kind of get the vibe off what you're all doing. So thank you.
Ms. Capps?
Thank you. Well, I have to say, when I saw this on the agenda, I was excited. It's intriguing. I think it solves some problems and some challenges that we've had. And so my questions, I appreciate your enthusiasm. I can feel it. I can feel it, and I'm excited. And so these questions are not at all about sort of any kind of questions about the enthusiasm and direction that has been started. It's really about OAS. I went back in preparing for this meeting to look at the board meeting when we decided to close OAS, which was a very, very challenging decision because, as we all know, that community is not just the community of those students who were there then, but a generation of some sort of magic here in Santa Barbara. And we really promised that community that there would be a task force and there would be a continuation of a dialogue. And I just want to ask, how's that happening? What has happened? Because I want to make sure that the elements of OAS are part of this design. And I appreciate that Dr. Kasten is part of this design team, but other than that, I'm not really, to me, what's missing in this presentation is that continuum. I went back and I listened to Dr. Reed's comments because you really outlined sort of 7 or 8 elements of that principles of OAS, inquiry-based learning, emphasis on social justice, emphasis on environmental literacy, and I'm just, again, it could be part of what you're just starting to do, but I just don't want to lose sight of that. And we're here as board members to represent the community. That's what our votes are, that's what our comments are, and that's a very important part of our community, and I just don't know if they've been listened to and involved into this, and with such a short time frame, I'm not sure how that might be possible. So I'm hoping it can be, and I'm optimistic, again, by your enthusiasm, but maybe Mr. Matsuoka, you can address some of that so that I can be even more excited about this decision to move in this direction and know that what we promised that community of OAS, because we acknowledged, like I said, it's really a magic that they had in this, and having born and raised here, I knew of it. But I want to make sure that we honor that and that we actually really truthfully incorporate what the magic of OAS into this next version. Thanks.
So let me respond to the question. I'm looking forward to having Marianne be part of this process. I mean, she was part of OAS for its entire life. I think we should go back to the list of characteristics of OAS, and that should inform the design conversation. But I do want to give this team the space and the latitude to design a school that addresses SBCA, incorporates OAS models, but is also preparing the kids of today. I mean, I was part of that OAS conversation for almost 2 years. There are great parts of it, and there were parts of it that the world had outgrown. And so I think the environmental literacy piece that's part of OAS, they've already spoken to it. The social emotional whole child learning, that's really the social emotional learning framework, it's whole child. And so I know that, I mean, that's why it's in the report. So I think my response to you is we will take those elements from those past comments from the board meeting, and then we'll make that part of the design process. Now, as far as I think a review by community members, this is a really fast timeline. It's driven by open enrollment. I mean, if we did a design process that lasted 6 months, we would not be able to recruit kids for next year. I think what's not in this timeline is how does the community have a chance to review and to weigh into it. So as we get into, let's say, November, December, we should figure out a way to have community input about this. It's actually going to be community marketing because we need to explain the model, but parents will be making decisions about where to place their kindergartners in December, January.
Okay, thank you. I would just encourage even one step further that there's actual specific outreach to the OAS families. It's not hard to find them. I welcomed one of them to Roosevelt as a kindergartner. So just so that, again, we make good on what we said we were going to do, and reaching out to the community to have involvement, I think, is excellent. But just a special invitation for those that community to be part of this process, I think would bode very well.
Ms. Sims-Mountain, did you? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Capps. Actually, I had printed out that whole list because I do think that we need to remember our promise and our positionality with regards to the task force. I want to kind of back up a minute, and I want to acknowledge that last spring, when Mr. Matsuoka said that there was trouble in paradise at Santa Barbara Community Academy, I was very, very upset with the idea that there potentially could be down the line another school closure. And I was like, no, that just can't happen. So what I appreciate is that instead of saying, it's heading for its demise, you have tried to reframe and come up with a plan. And I think that wasn't the case. I don't think the district stepped in a number of years ago when OAS was struggling. I think there was a lot of steps along the way that could have had some support from the district. I don't know, I wasn't on the board then, but I just know from the reports and the stories and the community that I've spoken to that there was a gradual decline. So the idea that there's a possibility of reframing and rethinking and redesigning something that could be potentially even better, because we know that OAS at the last stage was not a place that we could keep open. And we all know, we can keep saying it when we still feel it. It was the most painful decision. So, so I want to say that first pinpoint to say, wait, let's rethink this, and then to have someone like you, Ms. Sharfield, to say, you know, I'm not really sure, but I'm like, this is great, this is exciting. And then to have staff, I mean, it's like you're on the cutting edge of something so amazing. And so I would just reiterate Mr. Paredes Ulloa. I wish that I'm so glad that I'm going to be a part of this and watching this, because this, to me, is the most exciting thing that we can be doing. And that is really creating a school that's redesigned, that's for 21st century learning, that is going to incorporate all the positive, great things that we want to make sure are listed and are incorporated and integrated from OAS, but it's also looking ahead to the future of what we need to be looking at. I do want to make an emphasis that environmental and ecological literacy through place-based education, which is something I'm very passionate about. I know OAS was passionate about. I know that now that you're interested in that, that is a key aspect that I think should be a part of the school redesign. I think what you're hitting upon with the STEAM, with social emotional learning, project-based learning, does redesign block thinking of how, you know, it's not just these certain regimented timeframes that we're going to now teach music, now we're going to teach art, but the idea of integrating the curriculum within projects and work with that to me is what we have to be doing. It's just what we have to be doing. And so I just commend you for the effort and the work that you're going to have to do too. But I would think that it's also, as I say to my friend, you're on the precipice of potentiality. There is so much opportunity.
Watch out for that.
And I just feel like it's just a great innovative design. So what I'm looking forward to is, I know it's a quick turnaround, but I also think that it can be done. I want to also emphasize that I'm glad Dr. Caston, Demetrio Caston, is involved, and that we could include, I know some people that I could bring towards this conversation from OAS, but people within the community that have been involved through special education and work, because I think we need to really be thinking about how are we going to be supporting our special needs students or students with disabilities, and what does that look like? And so I'm excited. I can't wait. I think it's innovative to do something like this. I think we have to do something like this, and the fact that you're all here and wanting to do something like this is very amazing. And I support you all one day at a time. But it's great to be a part of this journey, I think. So I'm looking forward to the next step in this process. There you have it. Okay, so I guess I need to just turn to the board for a minute and say, are we, how are we doing? It's 10 after 10. We definitely have some board policies, which are always fun. And then we also have the elementary instructional minutes. So I guess I'm just turning to my fellow board members. And 2 consent agenda items. So
Are these time sensitive, these last 2 items here?
Meg says the policy thing will take 2 minutes.
okay. Policies are 2 minutes, but,
Let's table the elementary instructional minutes.
okay. So what we're gonna do is do the number 3 and number 4. Is that all right? Number 3 and number 4, and then back to our pulled agenda items, right?
Yep.
Okay. We in agreement?
Yes, whatever you said.
Policies and review the agenda pulled items, the consent agenda items.
Do you want to start the timer to see if I can do it in 2 minutes? Okay, so this evening we have 3 actually altogether, but first F3 is 1330, the use of facilities. This just allows us to, if we want to have different communities be able to use our fields for free, even though they charge, because we have a nonprofit and a for-profit.
So this allows us to do that if we want to waive it, even though that it's a dollar amount up to $60 per month that they can charge, and we can still waive the fees of the rentals of the fields. The only thing that we took out was the line on the three out of fourth page, and it says use of facilities as polling places, and it's all this policy also talks about polling places. I forgot to mention that earlier, but it's also about, we took out that we do not want to store their polling stuff at our school sites. We don't have the room to keep them there. So that's the only one we struck out, which is in the red. Any questions?
Any questions?
Right, just for curiosity, the county used to ask to keep the polling place?
Yeah, we will allow them to poll at our schools.
Which is
we
great.
just don't want to keep their stuff there.
That makes sense. Okay.
So I just had a question. Like, does this policy facility use include our charter schools at all?
No, they have their own facility use agreement, but if people don't usually, I mean, I don't ever get Peabody's requests, and so, but if they're doing Franklin campus and Goleta Valley, that all comes through us. But I've been waiting to talk to the principal about that because of an incident that happened during his sabbatical or whatever he took. So I haven't gotten around to that.
Yeah, because to that point, and I don't need to get into the depth of that, but I think the community doesn't see it as separate. It sees it as part of the school district. So that's why I was wondering if that should be at least somewhere embedded or something like that, so that it's clear, because it looks directly at the district and not necessarily at the charter school.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I've been able to think about this just a second longer, I do think it's wonderful when our schools are used as polling places, as civic education for everybody, and sometimes it's the only way that community people would come to a campus. So I hope that wouldn't discourage. Do you think that you have a sense that would discourage?
No,
the
I
county?
don't, because we don't store their things here, and they probably wouldn't want to store their stuff with us.
Okay.
They would probably want to keep an eye on it.
Okay, so it's not a common occurrence.
No,
It's just,
I've never come across this in my 10 years here.
Oh, so is that coming down from CSBA or something?
Mhm.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So can I bring this back on consent? As
Yes.
is? Okay, thank you. Okay, then the next two board policies are 3551 and 3553, which are all with food service. Our director, Nancy Weiss, takes a look at this and has accepted all the proposed changes. So she is good with everything that's CSBA proposes.
Mr. Paredes Ulloa.
Mr. Ross, if you go to page 2, paragraph 1. So that.
Are we on 3551?
Yes.
Okay.
So it says, shall ensure the student whose parent, guardian has unpaid school meal fees is not overtly identified, shamed, treated differently, or served a meal that differs from meals served to others. I was wondering if we could also add in denied meals?
Denied meals?
Like shall not be denied meals.
We don't deny meals.
I know, but
okay.
Just really want that kind of spelled out.
Okay.
I second that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So I can bring him back on consent with that change?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we are going to move to return to the consent agenda items number 1. And I believe, Ms. Capps, did you, no, was it?
Ms. Parker
Ms.
pulled it,
Parker,
but
yeah.
but I appreciated that I was about to myself. I think that I shouldn't characterize her rationale. I think she expressed that to you.
I spoke to her during
Yeah.
the break, and what she would like is for this to come back as an action item, not a consent item, given there was some community input about that. And so we will bring it back as an action item.
Yeah, and I appreciate it too, just contextually that we had the presentation, even though it's a piece of it, the evaluation. I just think it's, in terms of an order, I like the fact that we spent so much time on the dyslexia pilot project, and now we can fund the evaluation. Thank you.
All right, and now we'll move to agenda,
We
yeah,
actually should
we have
approve
to
that one.
approve, we have to. So is there a motion?
Sure, I move to bring item D1, I believe, back on an action item.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to item number 4 on our consent agenda.
Yes.
I think that's you, Ms. Simsbone.
Yes, I just had a couple of questions on it with regards to particularly our role as a district being a fundraiser in this effort. And I was a little concerned about that. That was in, I'm trying to think which one of those agreements it was in, considering that we're paying a considerable amount toward this, and then we're also expected to fundraise on this. So that was concerning to me. Don't know who needs to address that with regards to that. And it also felt like with the responsibilities for the district versus the services that are being provided by Just Community seemed a little out of balance, but perhaps it needs to be that way just because to make it work. But if someone could to address that issue, because for instance, on page 1 of 5 on thinking the, not sure which one that is, has 5 pages to it. So where it starts to say where the Just Community is going to provide copies and materials, they're going to do that, but yet on the client responsibilities, we're responsible for paying all of that. So I was just trying to figure out who's paying the cost of that.
Actually, I'm sorry to interject here, but I was appreciative that you pulled this one as well, and I'm wondering if, rather than get into this right now, if this is also something that we could, I've received some community feedback on this, and if we could move this to action as well, unless there's a time sensitivity to it.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, so I have several more questions. But
There is a bit of time sensitivity. I've spoke with Mr. Schwartz, and it's now August 28th. They're providing services, then the IEE workshop is scheduled. I mean, he's incurring his costs, so if we push this out to September 11th, you know, I'm not comfortable with that because of the commitments that we've had. I mean, Just Community's been a long-standing partner with us. I mean, I just offer that as a time constraint. We can wait.
And I appreciate that they have been non-standing clients, but I think I had the opportunity from a different perspective, a little bit more knowledgeable in the questions that I would have asked today versus, you know, when we first come on. So I would like a little bit more time to discuss it as well.
Okay.
So I think what we want to do then is move it to an action agenda item for discussion at our next board meeting.
Yes.
And I agree with my colleagues. Thank you.
If board members, if you could pass along any questions or concerns that you have to myself and Ms. Carey, that just will help us be ready for September 11th. Okay.
Yes. I move that this item be moved to the action agenda item.
Second.
Actually, you don't even need
I
to
don't need to do
take
that?
action.
Okay.
We'll just push
Okay.
it to the next agenda, or
Okay.
next meeting.
All right, so any coming events? Other than, we have a lot of open houses that we're excited. Back to school nights, back to school nights. So I know we're all signed up, we're on the chart, so we're looking forward to going to our different school sites that we've signed up for. Future agenda items?
Yes, I do have one. I had I work with the CEAS group, and they're really focusing on I don't know what the juice or whatever it's called in terms of that, but I would like for them to maybe come and make a presentation on the work that they're doing in the community. I know they want to work a little bit more closely with us. I don't know if you've had someone reach out to you, Fran, regarding that.
I'm on the listserv for CEAS, and I read their materials, and I do know the work that they're doing. It is a time constraint, but I definitely would like to, I think, having them present, and obviously that's work that we started doing last year. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we will add that to the agenda item. I know that we have a few of our other future agenda items that will be, they're in the process of coming forward, so. All right, so our next board meeting is Tuesday, September 11th. It will be a regular board meeting, and without further ado, I think it's time to close this meeting down. Thank you.